You see a child drowning in a pond. You could easily save the child but would ruin your expensive shoes. Most people say you must save the child. The cost to you is trivial compared to a life. Now consider. You could donate money to save a child dying of preventable disease far away. The cost is similar to a pair of shoes. But most people think this donation is optional, not obligatory. The doctrine of doing and allowing says there is a moral difference between causing harm and failing to prevent harm. Letting someone die is not as bad as killing them. But critics ask why location and causal directness matter morally. The child far away is just as dead whether you kill them or merely fail to save them. The suffering is the same. If distance matters, at what point does the obligation fade? 10 meters? 1 kilometer? Another country? Any line seems arbitrary. Defenders say intentions and agency matter. When you let someone die, you are not using them as a means. You are simply not helping. When you kill, you are actively making the world worse. The difference is real, even if the outcome is the same. But this distinction is hard to maintain. Refusing to donate when you easily could seems like a choice to allow death. You are acting by not acting. You are responsible through omission. The doctrine of doing and allowing captures common moral intuitions. We feel different about active harm versus passive allowance. But it is unclear whether this feeling reflects genuine moral truth or just psychological bias. The debate has enormous practical implications. If failing to prevent harm is as bad as causing it, most people in wealthy countries are constantly failing their moral obligations. The Toxin puzzle. A billionaire offers you $1 million. The only requirement is that you intend, right now, to drink a toxin tomorrow. The toxin will make you sick for a day but cause no lasting harm. The billionaire has a brain scanner that can verify your intention. If you genuinely intend to drink it, you get the money immediately. But here is the catch. Once you have the money, there is no reason to drink the toxin. The money is yours, regardless of what you actually do tomorrow. Drinking would just make you sick for no benefit. Can you form the genuine intention to drink the toxin? It seems impossible. You know that tomorrow, when the time comes, you will have every reason not to drink and no reason to drink. You cannot intend to do something you know you will not do. But if you cannot form the intention, you cannot get the money. This is the toxin puzzle, and it reveals something strange about intentions. Rational intentions seem to require seeing value in the intended action. But in the toxin case, drinking has no value at all. The value is in having intended, not in actually doing it. Some say you can form the intention and then rationally change your mind tomorrow. But the billionaire's scanner knows this. If your intention is fragile, it is not a real intention. Others say you can make yourself irrational temporarily. Use commitment devices or manipulation to force yourself to drink. But this seems to miss the point. The question is about pure intention, not about artificially constraining yourself. The toxin puzzle challenges decision theory. It seems like you should be able to get the money, but no theory of rational choice allows it. The puzzle suggests something is wrong with how we model intentions and practical reasoning, determinism, and free will. Drop a ball and it falls, push a cart and it rolls. Every physical event has a cause. The ball falls because gravity pulls it. The cart rolls because your force moved it. This seems obvious. The universe operates by cause and effect. Now apply this to your brain. Your brain is made of atoms following the laws of physics. Every thought you have is a pattern of neurons firing. Every decision you make comes from electrochemical processes in your skull. These processes follow physical laws, just like falling balls and rolling carts. Each state of your brain causes the next state. What you think right now was caused by what you thought a moment ago, which was caused by what came before that, in an unbroken chain stretching back to your birth and beyond. This means your choices are not really choices. When you picked what to eat for breakfast, that decision was determined by the exact state of your brain at that moment. The state of your brain was determined by your past experiences, your genes, your environment, all things you did not choose. Trace it back far enough, and every decision you make was set in motion by causes outside your control. If this is true, then free will is an illusion. You feel like you are choosing, but you are really just a complicated machine playing out a predetermined program. You could not have done otherwise. Some people respond by saying quantum mechanics introduces randomness into the universe. Brain processes might involve quantum events that are truly random, not determined, but randomness is not freedom either. If your decision is random, it is not under your control. A choice caused by a random quantum fluctuation is not your choice in any meaningful sense. Others argue that free will is compatible with determinism. They say that as long as your actions come from your desires and beliefs, you are acting freely, even if those desires and beliefs were caused by prior events. Freedom means doing what you want, not having wants that came from nowhere. But many find this unsatisfying. If what you want was itself determined by forces beyond your control, then acting on those wants does not feel truly free. The veil of ignorance. Society has rules about who gets what. Some people are born into wealth, others into poverty. Some have good health, others have disabilities. Some are naturally talented, others struggle with basic tasks. The lottery of birth is random and unfair. When designing a society's rules, people tend to favor whatever benefits them personally. The rich want low taxes. The poor want wealth redistribution. The strong want freedom to compete. The weak want protection and support. Everyone argues their position is fair and just, but really they are just protecting their own interests. The veil of ignorance offers a solution. Before setting up society's rules, place yourself behind a veil where you do not know what position you will occupy. You do not know if you will be rich or poor, healthy or sick, smart or slow, able-bodied or disabled. You have no idea what talents you will have or what family you will be born into. You might be anyone. From behind this veil, what rules would you choose? You cannot rig the system in your favor because you do not know what your favor is. You might set up a society that rewards talent, but then discover you have no talent. You might create a system with no safety net, then find yourself unable to work. You might make a world optimized for able-bodied people, then be born with a disability. Rational people behind the veil would probably choose rules that protect the worst-off members of society. Not because they are generous or kind, but because they might end up being one of those worst-off members. They would want healthcare available to all because they might need it. They would want food and shelter guaranteed because they might not be able to earn them. This thought tool removes bias by removing knowledge. When you do not know who you will be, you cannot be selfish in the normal way. You have to think about everyone's interests equally because you might be anyone. The veil of ignorance suggests that fair rules are rules you would accept without knowing where you will end up. Critics argue this is too hypothetical. We do know our positions. We cannot forget them. Still, the veil provides a useful check on our thinking. The experience machine. Technology advances to the point where scientists can create perfect simulations of experience. They build a machine with a simple offer: plug in and live any life you want. You will experience endless pleasure, achievement, love, adventure, whatever you desire. The simulation will be completely convincing. You will not know you are plugged in. You will think it is all real. There is one catch. Once you enter the machine, you stay forever. Your body will lie in a tank, being kept alive while your brain lives in the simulation. You will never accomplish anything real. You will never genuinely interact with another person. All your experiences will be artificial, manufactured by a computer feeding signals to your brain. Would you plug in? Most people say no. This reveals something important. We do not just want experiences. We want reality. Even if the machine can make you feel like you are climbing a mountain, actually climbing a mountain matters more. Even if it can simulate a loving relationship perfectly, being genuinely loved by a real person has value beyond the feeling. This suggests that pleasure and happiness are not the only things that matter. There is worth in actually doing things, not just feeling like you did them. There is value in genuine connection, not just the sensation of connection. Reality itself has importance beyond what it feels like. But think harder. How do you know you are not in the machine right now? How do you know this entire life is not a simulation designed to feel real? All your evidence for reality is just more experience, which the machine could produce. You trust your senses to tell you what is real, but your senses are just signals in your brain, exactly what the machine would create. The experience machine forces a choice between feeling good and being real. Most people pick being real, which tells us something deep about human values. The trolley problem. A trolley is rolling down a track toward 5 people who will be killed if it continues. You are standing next to a lever. If you pull the lever, the trolley will switch to a different track where it will kill 1 person instead of 5. Do you pull the lever? Most people say yes. 5 deaths are worse than 1 death. Pulling the lever saves 4 lives. The math is simple. Now change the situation slightly. The trolley is rolling toward 5 people. You are standing on a bridge above the track next to a large person. If you push this person off the bridge onto the track, their body will stop the trolley, saving the 5 people but killing the 1 person you pushed. Do you push? Most people say no. Even though the numbers are identical, 1 death versus 5 deaths, pushing someone feels different from pulling a lever. It feels more like murder. It feels more personal, more direct, more wrong. This difference reveals a split in moral thinking. One part of us calculates outcomes. 5 lives are worth more than 1 life. The right action is the one that produces the best result. This is called consequentialism. Consequences are what matter. Another part of us follows rules. There is a rule against killing people directly. Pushing someone to their death violates this rule. Redirecting a trolley might cause a death, but it does not violate the same rule. This is called deontology. Duties and rules are what matter. The trolley problem gets more complicated with variations. What if the 1 person on the side track did not choose to be there, but the 5 people on the main track knew the track was dangerous? What if the 1 person is a child, and the 5 people are old? Every variation changes intuitions, but no clear principle explains all the changes. The real power of the trolley problem is not finding the right answer. The real power is exposing the machinery of moral judgment. We think we have clear values, but when forced to apply them in hard cases, we discover our values conflict. The brain in a vat. Your brain sits in a vat of liquid in a laboratory. Wires connect to all your neurons. A computer sends electrical signals through the wires, creating the perfect illusion of experience. You think you have a body, but you do not. You think you are walking around in a world, but you are not. Every sight, sound, feeling, and thought is just a signal generated by the computer. Could you be a brain in a vat right now? You cannot prove you are not. Every piece of evidence you could point to, your body, the world around you, other people, could be simulated. Your memories of the past could be false memories implanted by the computer. Your sense that this is too crazy to be true is itself just another feeling the computer could produce. Some people try to escape by arguing that if you were a brain in a vat, you could not even think about being a brain in a vat. The words brain and vat refer to real things. If you have never experienced real brains in vats, only simulations, then your words do not mean what you think they mean. This response is clever but unsatisfying. The real problem remains. You cannot tell the difference between genuine experience and perfect simulation. The brain in a vat is an updated version of an older problem. Centuries ago, philosophers worried that an evil demon might be deceiving them, creating illusions of a world that does not exist. The demon plays the role of the computer. The underlying worry is the same. How do you know your senses show you truth rather than elaborate lies? One answer is to stop caring. Even if you are a brain in a vat, you still have experiences. You still feel pain and pleasure. You still make decisions. The practical reality of your life does not change, but this feels like giving up. We want to know what is real. The brain in a vat shows that certainty about the external world is impossible. You can be certain you are having experiences, but you cannot be certain those experiences connect to anything beyond themselves. The paradox of the heap. Start with a pile of sand containing 10,000 grains. This is clearly a heap. Remove one grain. It is still a heap. Remove another grain. Still a heap. Keep removing grains one at a time. At what point does it stop being a heap? There is no clear answer. Going from 10,000 grains to 9,999 grains does not turn a heap into a non-heap. Neither does going from 100 to 99 or from 10 to 9. But somewhere along the way, the heap disappears. You end up with one grain, and one grain is definitely not a heap. The problem is that heap has no sharp boundary. Language works with fuzzy categories that have clear centers but blurry edges. We can all agree that 10,000 grains make a heap, and one grain does not. But the middle ground is indeterminate. There is no specific number where heapness clicks on or off. This is not just about sand. The same problem applies to almost every word. When does a person become old? When does a collection of cells become alive? When does a group become a crowd? When does a company become large? Every category we use has borderline cases where the answer is unclear. The paradox of the heap, also called the Sorites paradox, attacks the idea that reality comes in neat packages. We talk as if things either are or are not a heap, are or are not old, are or are not alive. But nature does not provide these clean divisions. Nature provides continuums. We impose categories on top of continuums, and then get confused when the categories do not fit perfectly. One response is to just pick a number. Decide that 500 grains is the cutoff for a heap. This solves the logical problem but feels arbitrary. Another response is to embrace vagueness. Accept that some questions have no determinate answer. But vagueness creates problems for logic, which assumes every statement is either true or false. Moral relativism. Different cultures have different moral codes. Some cultures allow multiple spouses. Others insist on monogamy. Some cultures emphasize individual rights. Others prioritize community duty. Some cultures permit eating certain animals. Others forbid it. The diversity is vast and deep. Moral relativism says these differences reflect the fact that morality is not universal. There is no single true moral code that applies to everyone. Instead, morality is relative to culture. What is right in one culture can be wrong in another, and both cultures can be correct according to their own standards. This view has appeal. It seems to respect cultural diversity. It avoids the arrogance of claiming your culture has figured out the one true morality, while everyone else is wrong. It explains why moral disagreements are so hard to resolve. People are operating from different starting points with no neutral ground to meet on. But relativism creates problems. If morality is relative, then you cannot criticize other cultures' practices. A culture that practices slavery is not wrong according to relativism. It is just following different moral standards. You can say you dislike it, or that it violates your culture's standards, but you cannot say it is objectively wrong. The culture doing it is right by its own standards, and those standards are as valid as yours. This makes moral progress impossible to define. When a culture changes its moral views, say, abolishing slavery or granting equal rights, is that progress or just change? Progress implies movement toward something better, but relativism says there is no better, just different. The alternative to relativism is moral realism. Realism says there are objective moral truths that do not depend on culture. Slavery is wrong everywhere, even in cultures that practice it. Those cultures are making a moral mistake, but realism faces its own challenges. If moral truths are objective, where do they come from? How do we access them? Personal identity over time. You wake up tomorrow with all the same memories, but in a completely different body. Your brain was copied while you slept and installed in a new body. The old body was destroyed. Are you still you? Most people say yes, the body is just a container. What makes you you is your mind, your memories, personality, beliefs, and desires. As long as those continue, personal identity continues, regardless of what physical form holds them. But now, change the case. The copying machine malfunctions. Instead of destroying the old body, it leaves it intact. Now there are two beings with identical memories and personalities. One has your original body. One has a new body. Which one is you? Both beings will claim to be you. Both will remember your entire life. Both will feel like they are the continuous person who went to sleep last night. From the inside, each one's claim seems absolutely true. But they cannot both be you, because you are one person, and they are two people. This problem reveals that personal identity is not as straightforward as it seems. We think of ourselves as single, continuous beings who persist over time. But what grounds this persistence? What makes the person you are now the same person you were 10 years ago? One answer is physical continuity. You are the same person because you have the same body, or at least a body that has changed gradually through a continuous process. But this answer fails in the copying case. Another answer is psychological continuity. You are the same person because you have memories and personality traits that connect to your past self. But psychological continuity fails in the copying case too. Both the original and the copy have psychological continuity with your past self. Personal identity seems to require being a single, continuous thing, but both physical and psychological continuity can branch into multiple beings. The naturalistic fallacy. In nature, animals compete for resources. The strong survive and the weak die. This is how evolution works. It is a natural process that has been happening for billions of years. Some people look at this and conclude that because competition is natural, it must be good. Because survival of the fittest occurs in nature, we should organize human society the same way. Let the strong thrive and the weak fail. This is the naturalistic fallacy. The mistake of thinking that because something is natural, it must be right or good. But natural does not mean good. Many natural things are terrible. Disease is natural. Death is natural. Suffering is natural. We do not conclude that disease is good just because it occurs naturally. We fight against it. We try to cure it. Natural processes are just descriptions of how things are, not prescriptions for how things should be. The naturalistic fallacy appears everywhere. People argue that humans have always eaten meat, so vegetarianism is wrong. People say inequality has always existed, so trying to reduce it goes against nature. People claim that violence is part of human nature, so we should accept it rather than try to minimize it. All these arguments make the same mistake. They confuse what is with what ought to be. Even if something has always been a certain way, that does not mean it should stay that way. Even if a behavior is part of our evolutionary heritage, that does not make it morally acceptable. The opposite mistake is also possible, assuming that because something is unnatural, it must be bad. This is sometimes called the appeal to nature. People reject artificial foods, synthetic medicines, or technological solutions because they are not natural, but unnatural things can be good. Modern medicine is unnatural. So is cooking food, wearing clothes, and living in houses. The question is not whether something is natural or unnatural. The question is whether it causes good outcomes or bad ones. The is-ought problem. You can observe facts about the world. Water boils at 100 degrees. Gravity pulls objects down. The sun rises in the east. These are all statements about what is. They describe reality as it exists. Now try to get from these facts to a moral conclusion about what ought to be. You cannot do it. No amount of factual observation tells you what is right or wrong. You can describe how people actually behave, but that does not tell you how they should behave. You can study what makes people happy, but that does not prove happiness is what matters. There is a gap between descriptive statements and prescriptive statements, between facts and values, between is and ought. This gap was identified centuries ago, but it remains unsolved. Science can tell us what the world is like. It can describe causes and effects. It can predict outcomes, but it cannot tell us which outcomes we should pursue. That requires values, and values do not come from observation. Some people try to bridge the gap by starting with a factual claim about human nature. They say humans naturally seek pleasure and avoid pain, therefore we ought to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. But this sneaks in an assumption that we ought to do what comes naturally. That assumption is itself a value judgment that cannot be proven from facts alone. Others try to derive values from evolution. They say behaviors that helped our ancestors survive must be good. But survival is not automatically a moral goal. You have to first decide that survival matters, and that decision is a value choice that science cannot make for you. The is-ought problem suggests that moral reasoning cannot be purely rational or scientific. At some point, you have to make a leap from describing the world to evaluating it. You have to import values from somewhere outside, pure observation and logic. Negative rights versus positive rights. Negative rights are rights not to be interfered with. You have a negative right to free speech, meaning others should not prevent you from speaking. You have a negative right to property, meaning others should not steal from you. You have a negative right to life, meaning others should not kill you. These rights require people to leave you alone. They impose no duty to act, only a duty to refrain from certain actions. Positive rights are rights to be provided with something. A right to health care means someone must provide you with medical care. A right to education means someone must teach you. A right to food means someone must feed you if you cannot feed yourself. These rights require active provision, not just non-interference. The distinction matters because the two types of rights create different obligations. Negative rights are relatively easy to respect. You can respect everyone's negative rights simply by not harming them. Positive rights are harder. Someone must provide the goods or services. That typically means taxation to fund programs, which restricts property rights. There is also a practical difference. Negative rights can usually be provided to everyone simultaneously. Everyone can have free speech at once. Everyone can be free from assault at once. But positive rights compete for resources. Healthcare for everyone requires doctors, hospitals, equipment, and medicine. There might not be enough to give everyone everything they need. Societies that emphasize negative rights tend to value freedom and limited government. The state should protect people from harm, but otherwise leave them alone. Societies that emphasize positive rights tend to value equality and active government. The state should ensure everyone has basic necessities and opportunities. Most real societies recognize both types of rights but disagree about the balance. How much freedom should be restricted to provide for welfare? How much should we tolerate inequality to preserve liberty? The paradox of tolerance. A tolerant society values allowing different views and ways of life. It does not impose one belief system on everyone. People are free to think and act as they choose, as long as they do not harm others. This seems like a good principle. But what happens when some people use their freedom to advocate for intolerance? What if a group wants to take power and end tolerance itself? Should a tolerant society tolerate those who would destroy tolerance? If yes, then tolerance becomes self-defeating. By tolerating the intolerant, you allow them to gain power and impose their intolerance on everyone. Tolerance leads to its own destruction. If no, then the society is not truly tolerant. It draws a line and says some views are not acceptable. But once you start limiting what can be said and believed, you are no longer fully committed to tolerance as a principle. The paradox has no clean solution. Some say tolerance should be unlimited. Any restriction makes you the intolerant one. The solution is more speech, not less. Counter bad ideas with good ones. Let truth win in the marketplace of ideas. But this assumes people are rational and will choose good ideas over bad ones. History shows this is not always true. Sometimes bad ideas win. Sometimes intolerant movements gain power through legitimate means and then close the door behind them. Others say tolerance must be limited to survive. A tolerant society can and should defend itself against those who would destroy it. This does not make it intolerant in the bad sense. It is a rational act of self-preservation. You can be tolerant of most things while still refusing to tolerate the intolerant. But this requires deciding who counts as intolerant enough to suppress, which is a power that can be abused. The problem of induction. The sun has risen every day of your life. It rose yesterday. It rose today. From this pattern, you conclude it will rise tomorrow. This seems reasonable. You are using past experience to predict the future. But there is a problem. Why should the future resemble the past? Just because something has always happened does not logically prove it will keep happening. Every time you see the sun rise, you gain one more piece of evidence, but you never get proof. The next time could always be different. This is the problem of induction, the question of how we justify reasoning from past to future. All science depends on induction. We observe that objects fall when dropped. We conclude, gravity will keep working. We test a drug on patients. We conclude it will work on future patients. But none of this is certain. It is all based on the assumption that nature is regular, that the laws governing the universe today will govern it tomorrow. We cannot prove this assumption. Any proof would itself rely on induction. You might say, nature has been regular in the past, so it will be regular in the future, but that is circular reasoning. You are using induction to justify induction. Some people respond that induction does not need justification. It is just how reasoning works. We could not function without assuming the future will resemble the past. Even skeptics who question induction rely on it in daily life, but this does not answer the philosophical question. Just because we must use induction does not mean it is justified. We might be living on assumptions that could fail at any moment. Every prediction we make is a leap of faith. The masked man fallacy. You know who your father is. You do not know who the masked man robbing the bank is. Therefore, your father is not the masked man. This reasoning seems fine until you realize it leads to absurd conclusions. The masked man might actually be your father, and you just did not recognize him. The fallacy is treating knowing as a property of things rather than a relation between you and things. You do not know that the masked man is your father because you do not know who the masked man is, but that does not mean they are different people. This fallacy appears in subtler forms. Someone might argue that thoughts are about things in the world, but brain states are not about things, therefore thoughts are not brain states. But this assumes that if two things differ in any property, they must be different things. In reality, the same thing can be described in different ways. The morning star and the evening star are the same planet viewed at different times. Superman and the reporter are the same person in different contexts. Identity does not require sameness in every respect. Things can be identical, even if we think about them differently. The masked man fallacy teaches careful attention to how we use language. Terms that seem to refer to different things might actually refer to the same thing under different descriptions. Our ignorance about identities does not create real distinctions in the world. The somatic marker hypothesis. Decisions seem to happen in the rational part of your brain. You weigh options, calculate outcomes, and choose what serves your goals. But research suggests emotions play a larger role than we think. People with damage to emotional brain regions can describe what they should do, but cannot actually decide. They know the rational answer, but feel no pull toward it. The somatic marker hypothesis says emotions create markers that guide decisions. When you consider an option, your body produces a subtle feeling, attraction or aversion. These feelings, not just logical analysis, drive choice. Your gut reaction is not irrational, it is information. It summarizes past experience and emotional learning in a way that conscious thought cannot access. This challenges the old view that emotion interferes with reason. Instead, emotion and reason work together. Pure reason without emotion produces paralysis, not clarity. You need feelings to care about outcomes and assign value to options, but this also raises concerns. If emotions drive decisions, and emotions are shaped by past experience, then people with different experiences will decide differently even when looking at the same facts. There might be no view from nowhere, no purely objective way to choose. Every decision is filtered through emotional reactions built from personal history. This makes rationality more complicated than it seemed. The Chinese room. A person sits in a room with a book of rules. Papers with Chinese characters come in through a slot. The person does not understand Chinese but follows the rules to manipulate the characters and send new papers out. To someone outside, it looks like the room understands Chinese. Questions go in, correct answers come out. But the person inside is just following instructions without understanding anything. This is the Chinese room thought experiment. It argues that computers running programs are like the person in the room. They manipulate symbols according to rules. They can produce correct outputs without understanding what they mean. A computer passing a language test is not thinking. It is just processing symbols. The implication is that understanding requires something more than following rules. Consciousness involves genuine comprehension, not just producing correct responses. You could have a system that acts intelligent without actually being intelligent. Critics respond that maybe the room as a whole understands Chinese, even if the person inside does not. Understanding might be a property of the entire system, a person plus rules, plus process, not just the person. Or maybe understanding is nothing more than the right kind of symbol manipulation. If a system can respond appropriately to any Chinese input, in what sense does it lack understanding? The debate reveals uncertainty about what understanding even means. We recognize it in ourselves but cannot quite define it or identify what produces it. The utility monster. A society tries to maximize total happiness, add up everyone's happiness and choose policies that make the sum as large as possible. This seems fair. But now, introduce the utility monster, a being that gets enormously more happiness from resources than anyone else. Give it food, and it feels 1,000 times more pleasure than a normal person. Give it money, and it experiences joy beyond measure. If you are maximizing total happiness, you should give everything to the utility monster. Starve everyone else if necessary. The monster's happiness outweighs all of theirs combined. This shows a problem with maximizing total happiness. It ignores distribution. A world where one being is extremely happy and everyone else is miserable has more total happiness than a world where everyone is moderately happy, but most people find the first world worse. We care not just about how much happiness exists, but also about how it is spread around. The utility monster also reveals issues with comparing happiness between individuals. Can one person really be 1,000 times happier than another? How would you measure that? If happiness cannot be compared across people, then maximizing total happiness makes no sense. Some respond by focusing on average happiness rather than total happiness. But average happiness leads to different problems. You could increase average happiness by eliminating everyone below average. That seems wrong too. The utility monster is absurd, but it points to real challenges in any attempt to create a moral system based on happiness or well-being. The problem of evil. If there is an all-powerful, all-knowing, perfectly good being, then why does evil exist? An all-powerful being could prevent any evil. An all-knowing being would know about every evil. A perfectly good being would want to prevent evil. Yet evil exists. Children suffer. Natural disasters kill innocent people. Diseases cause agony. Either the being is not all-powerful, or not all-knowing, or not perfectly good, or such a being does not exist at all. This is the problem of evil, and it has troubled believers for thousands of years. Some respond that evil is necessary for free will. Beings with genuine choice must be able to choose wrong. A world with free creatures must allow the possibility of evil. But this only explains moral evil, evil caused by choices. It does not explain natural evil like earthquakes and cancer. No one chooses those. Others say evil serves a greater purpose we cannot understand. Suffering builds character. It teaches compassion. It makes good possible by providing contrast. But could an all-powerful being not achieve these goals without quite so much suffering? Must children die of disease for adults to learn compassion? Another response is that we are judging from limited perspective. What seems evil to us might be good when viewed from eternity. But this makes good and evil meaningless. If anything could be secretly good, including torture and murder, then the words lose their meaning. The problem of evil does not disprove the existence of such a being conclusively, but it creates serious tension. Believers must explain how perfect goodness and omnipotence coexist with obvious suffering. The repugnant conclusion. A world contains 10 billion people, all living happy, fulfilling lives. Compare this to a world with 1 trillion people, living lives barely worth living. They have a tiny bit more pleasure than pain, just enough to be glad they exist. But they are not happy. They suffer mostly, with brief moments of mild satisfaction. Which world is better? If you base morality on total happiness, the second world wins. 1 trillion people with lives barely worth living add up to more total happiness than 10 billion people with great lives. But calling the second world better seems repugnant. We want to say that quality matters, not just quantity. Better to have fewer people living well than enormous numbers living miserably. Yet any principle that avoids this conclusion faces problems. If you say the first world is better, you are saying that sometimes less total happiness is better than more. But then you need a rule for when to accept less happiness, and any rule seems arbitrary. This is the repugnant conclusion. It shows that simple theories about goodness lead to results that clash with intuition. Maybe total happiness is not what matters. Maybe there is a threshold where adding more barely worth living people makes things worse, not better. But defining that threshold is difficult, and any definition seems to involve arbitrary lines. The repugnant conclusion forces us to recognize that our moral intuitions do not form a consistent system. Different principles we hold dear conflict with each other, and we must choose which to prioritize. The ship of Theseus. A wooden ship sits in the harbor. It has been there for decades, sailing and returning, sailing and returning. Over time, the wood begins to rot. One plank gets replaced, then another. Then the mast needs replacing. The sails wear out and new ones go up. Year after year, piece after piece, every single part of the ship gets swapped out for something new. Eventually, not a single original plank remains. Every bit of wood, every nail, every rope is different from the day the ship was built. Here is the question. Is it still the same ship? Most people say yes. It looks the same. It serves the same purpose. It has the same name painted on the side. But think deeper. If you took all those old planks that were removed and rebuilt the original ship from them, which one would be the real ship? The one sailing in the harbor with all new parts, or the one reconstructed from the original materials sitting in a warehouse? This problem extends far beyond boats. Your own body replaces most of its cells over time. The atoms that made up your skin, your bones, your organs, 7 years ago, are largely gone, replaced by new ones from the food you ate and the air you breathed. The matter is completely different, yet you still call yourself by the same name. You still think of yourself as the same person. Companies face this too. A business might fire every employee and hire new ones. It might change its location, its products, even its purpose. But if it keeps the same name and legal structure, we say it is the same company. Where does identity actually live? Is it in the physical parts, in the pattern those parts make, in the continuous history, or just in the name we give something? The ship of Theseus forces us to realize that identity is not as solid as it seems. Things we think of as single, unified objects might just be collections of parts we group together in our minds. The boundaries we draw around objects and call them one thing might be arbitrary. This idea shakes the foundation of how we understand everything around us, including ourselves. The open question argument. Someone says that good means whatever produces happiness. But you can still sensibly ask, is happiness really good? This question makes sense. It is not like asking, is a bachelor really unmarried? Where the answer is contained in the definition. This shows that good does not simply mean happiness. If it did, the question would be nonsensical, like asking if bachelors are unmarried. The open question argument says that for any natural property you identify with goodness, happiness, pleasure, survival, whatever, you can always meaningfully ask whether that property is truly good. The question remains open. This suggests goodness is not identical to any natural property. It is something separate, something that cannot be reduced to facts about the world. You can describe all the natural facts about an action, that it produces happiness, reduces suffering, promotes survival, and still meaningfully ask if it is good. Critics respond that this argument proves too much. By the same reasoning, you could say water is not H2O because you can sensibly ask, is water really H2O? Before you learn chemistry. The question is open only because of ignorance, not because the terms mean different things. But defenders say moral questions are different. Even with perfect knowledge of natural facts, the question of goodness remains open. You can know everything about what an action causes and still wonder if you should do it. The open question argument suggests that ethics cannot be reduced to science. Moral truths, if they exist, are a different kind of truth than physical truths. No amount of studying the world will tell you what is good unless you bring moral concepts with you from the start. The paradox of fiction. You watch a movie and feel fear when the monster appears. You read a book and feel sad when a character dies. But you know the monster is not real. You know the character never existed. How can you have genuine emotions about things you know are fictional? Fear makes sense when you believe you are in danger. Sadness makes sense when you believe something bad happened. But you do not believe the events in the story are real. You know they are made up. Yet your emotional response is genuine. Your heart races. Tears come. The emotions are not pretend. Some say you temporarily suspend disbelief. You forget the story is fiction and respond as if it were real. But this does not match experience. Throughout the story, you know it is fiction. You do not try to call the police when you see a movie murder. You do not believe your friend died when you read about a character with the same name. Others say emotions do not require belief. They only require thought. You do not have to believe the monster is real to imagine it and feel fear. Imagining danger is enough to trigger emotion. The mind does not distinguish perfectly between believed thoughts and imagined ones when generating feeling, but this seems to make emotions less rational than we thought. If you can feel fear without believing you are in danger, then emotions are not reliable guides to reality. They respond to representations, not just to facts. The paradox of fiction reveals something strange about how our minds work. We can be moved by what we know is not real. Stories have power over us despite their falseness. This might explain why fiction matters. It allows us to experience emotions and situations safely, expanding our emotional range without real consequences. The knowledge argument. A scientist studies color vision her entire life. She knows every physical fact about how light enters the eye, how the retina processes it, how neurons fire in the brain to create color experience. She knows all the physics, biology, and neuroscience of color. But she has lived her whole life in a black and white room, seeing only through black and white monitors. She has never actually experienced color. One day she leaves the room and sees red for the first time. Does she learn something new? Most people say yes. She learns what red looks like. She gains knowledge of the experience itself, not just knowledge about the physical processes that produce it, but she already knew all the physical facts. If seeing red teaches her something new, then there must be facts about experience that are not physical facts. This is the knowledge argument, and it suggests that consciousness cannot be fully explained by physical science. Experience has properties that go beyond what physics can describe. Critics respond that she does not gain new factual knowledge. She gains a new ability, the ability to recognize and imagine red. Or she gains new knowledge of old facts, read in one way, through descriptions, and now knows about it in another way, through experience. Both are knowledge of the same physical process. But defenders say this misses the point. Before leaving the room, she could fully describe the physical process of seeing red but did not know what it felt like. The feeling is something extra, something that physical description leaves out. The knowledge argument does not prove that consciousness is non-physical, but it reveals a deep puzzle. Subjective experience seems to have qualities that objective science cannot capture. You can know everything about brain function and still not know what it is like to be the brain. The grandfather paradox. You build a time machine and travel to the past. You find your grandfather as a young man, before he met your grandmother. You prevent them from meeting. They never marry. Your parent is never born. You are never born. But if you were never born, you could not have traveled back in time to prevent your own birth. Yet if you did not travel back, your grandparents would have met, and you would have been born to travel back. The situation contradicts itself. This is the grandfather paradox, and it suggests time travel to the past is impossible. Any change you make in the past creates a contradiction. Either you exist and prevent your existence, which is impossible, or you do not exist and cannot prevent your existence, which is also impossible. Some respond with the many worlds interpretation. When you travel back and change the past, you create a new timeline that branches off from the original. In the new timeline, you are not born. But the old timeline still exists, and in it, you were born and did travel back. Both timelines are real. You just moved from one to another. Others say the past cannot be changed. If you travel back, everything you do was always part of history. You might try to prevent your grandparents from meeting, but you will fail. Something will stop you. The universe conspires to maintain consistency. What happened always happened, even if it includes time travelers from the future. Still others argue that time travel creates paradoxes precisely because it is impossible. The paradoxes are not problems to solve, but demonstrations that backward time travel contradicts logic and therefore cannot occur in reality. The grandfather paradox reveals deep questions about time. Is the past fixed or changeable? Does time branch or flow in one line? Are there constraints on what can happen that go beyond ordinary physical laws? The original position. Before society exists, before you know your place in it, you must design the rules everyone will live under. You do not know if you will be rich or poor, healthy or sick, talented or average. This is called the original position. From this position, what rules would rational people choose? They would want rules that protect them in case they end up at the bottom. They would not gamble on being at the top. They would choose rules that make even the worst positions tolerable. This leads to principles like, everyone should have equal basic rights, and inequalities are only acceptable if they benefit the worst-off members of society. The original position is a tool for thinking about justice. It removes bias by removing information about your personal stake. You cannot design rules to favor yourself because you do not know who you are. Some criticize this approach as too individualistic. It assumes people are self-interested and rational, but real people care about others. They have loyalties to family, community, and culture. They are not the isolated choosers the original position imagines. Others say the original position is too risk-averse. People behind the veil would be so worried about the worst case that they would choose overly safe rules that prevent innovation and excellence. A just society should allow risk and reward, not just protect the bottom. Still, the original position provides a useful perspective. When debating policy, ask what you would want if you did not know your position. This forces consideration of all viewpoints, and prevents you from simply defending your current advantages. The liar paradox. Consider the sentence. This sentence is false. If the sentence is true, then what it says is the case, which means it is false. If the sentence is false, then what it says is not the case, which means it is true. The sentence cannot be consistently assigned a truth value. This is the liar paradox, and it has troubled logicians for thousands of years. It seems to show that our basic concepts of truth and falsity are incoherent. Some respond by saying the sentence is meaningless. It looks like a sentence but does not actually make a statement. It is grammatical nonsense. But this seems ad hoc. The sentence has clear meaning. We understand what it is trying to say. Others say the sentence is neither true nor false. It is a third category beyond the binary. But this requires revising logic, and it is unclear how far those revisions should go. Still others say the problem comes from self-reference. Sentences should not refer to themselves, but self-reference appears throughout language and mathematics. We cannot simply ban it without losing important expressive power. The liar paradox reveals that language can turn back on itself in ways that create contradictions. Our semantic concepts might not be as solid as they seem. Truth might be a more complicated notion than simple correspondence between sentences and facts. The paradox has practical versions too. If someone says, "I am lying right now," are they telling the truth or lying? The question has no consistent answer, yet we use this kind of language all the time without noticing the underlying contradiction. The prisoner's dilemma. Two people are arrested for a crime. The police separate them and make each an offer. If you testify against the other person and they stay silent, you go free and they get 10 years. If you both stay silent, you each get 1 year on a lesser charge. If you both testify, you each get 5 years. What should you do? From your perspective, betraying is better regardless of what the other person does. If they stay silent, you go free by betraying, instead of getting 1 year by staying silent. If they betray, you get 5 years by betraying instead of 10 years by staying silent. Betraying is the rational choice. But the other person faces the same reasoning. You both betray. You both get 5 years. If you had both stayed silent, you would have each gotten only 1 year. By acting rationally as individuals, you produce a worse outcome for both. This is the prisoner's dilemma, and it shows how rational self-interest can lead to collectively bad results. The dilemma appears throughout life. Countries build weapons because they cannot trust others to disarm, creating an arms race that makes everyone less safe. Companies pollute because acting responsibly would put them at a competitive disadvantage, creating environmental damage that hurts everyone. People take antibiotics too often because it helps them now, creating resistant bacteria that harm everyone later. The solution might be cooperation, but cooperation requires trust. If you cannot be sure the other person will cooperate, you have reason to defect first. Repeated interactions help. If you will face the same situation many times with the same person, you can build trust through reciprocity. Cooperate if they cooperate, retaliate if they betray. But in one-time interactions, the dilemma remains. The prisoner's dilemma reveals tension between individual and collective rationality. What is best for each person separately is not what is best for everyone together. Solving this tension requires mechanisms beyond individual choice, agreements, enforcement, institutions that align private incentives with public good. The Chinese nation. Suppose the entire population of a country is organized to simulate a single brain. Each person represents one neuron. They communicate with each other according to rules that mimic how neurons fire. The system as a whole processes information in exactly the same way a brain does. Does this system have consciousness? Does it feel and think? Most people say no. A nation of people following rules is not conscious, even if it processes information like a brain. But why not? If consciousness comes from the right kind of information processing, and the nation is doing that processing, it should be conscious. The structure is the same. Only the physical substrate is different. Neurons replaced by people. This thought experiment challenges the idea that consciousness is just computation. It suggests that what things are made of matters, not just how they are organized. Or perhaps consciousness requires integration in a way that a spread-out nation of people cannot achieve. The parts must be connected in the right way, not just following the right rules. Others bite the bullet and say the nation would be conscious if it truly replicated brain function. It seems absurd, but our intuitions about consciousness might be wrong. We cannot imagine what it would be like to be a nation-sized mind, but that does not mean it would not have experience. The Chinese nation argument reveals that we do not really understand what makes a system conscious. We cannot identify the necessary and sufficient conditions. We rely on intuition, and intuition fails when we consider unusual cases. The Doomsday argument. You are one human among all humans who will ever live. Your birth rank is roughly 100 billion. There have been about 100 billion people before you. Now estimate the total number of humans who will ever exist. One approach says humanity might last millions of years and produce trillions of people. But if that is true, your birth rank is suspiciously early. You would be in the first tiny fraction of all humans. It is more likely that you are somewhere in the middle of the distribution. If you are typical, then maybe only a few 100 billion more people will be born before humanity ends. This is the Doomsday argument. It suggests human extinction will come sooner than we think, based on probabilistic reasoning about your place in the sequence of all humans. Critics say this reasoning is flawed. Being born at a particular time is not like being randomly selected from all humans ever. You could only be born when you were born. The fact that you are early in the sequence does not make a long future less likely. Others defend the argument by comparing it to simpler cases. If you know you are one of 100 people in a room, and you are number 7, you should expect there are not vastly more people in other rooms you do not know about. Otherwise, it would be very unlikely you ended up in this small group. The same reasoning applies to your position in human history. The Doomsday argument is controversial, but it raises important questions about probabilistic reasoning and how to think about your place in the universe. Are you special or typical? Can you make predictions about the future based on when you were born? The principle of explosion. Start with a contradiction. Say something is both true and false at the same time. From this contradiction, you can prove literally anything. Here is how. Assume both A and not A are true. From A being true, you can derive A or B for any statement B. From not A being true and A or B being true, you can conclude B must be true. B can be anything. The moon is made of cheese. 2 + 2 = 5. You are the ruler of the universe. All statements become provable from a contradiction. This is called the principle of explosion, and it shows why contradictions are so dangerous in logical systems. One contradiction infects everything. If your premises contradict each other, you can prove any conclusion, making the system useless. Some logics try to contain contradictions. They are called paraconsistent logics, and they allow contradictions without exploding into nonsense. These logics might be useful for reasoning about inconsistent information or databases with conflicting entries. But most logics avoid contradictions completely. A single contradiction ruins everything. This is why finding a contradiction in mathematics or science is so serious. It means something in the system must be wrong. The principle of explosion also explains why people who hold contradictory beliefs can seem to believe anything. If your worldview contains contradictions, you can rationalize any position. The contradictions act as seeds from which any conclusion can grow. The Swampman. Lightning strikes a swamp and, by incredible coincidence, rearranges atoms into a perfect replica of a person. This being, called Swampman, has a body identical to the person who was struck. It has the same brain structure, the same apparent memories, the same dispositions. But it was not born. It did not grow. It did not have experiences. It just popped into existence 1 second ago. Does Swampman have thoughts? Does it have beliefs about the world? Most theories of mental content say no. Beliefs are about things because they were caused by interactions with those things. Your belief about dogs is about dogs because you learned the concept through experiences with actual dogs. Swampman never interacted with anything. Its memories are not memories of real events. Its knowledge is not knowledge because it was not acquired. It is a being without a history, and history is what gives mental states their content. But Swampman seems to have thoughts from the inside. If you were Swampman, you would feel exactly like you do now. You would think you remembered the past. You would believe things about the world. The difference between you and Swampman would be invisible to consciousness. This creates a puzzle. Either mental content depends on history, which means introspection does not reveal what your thoughts are about, or mental content is determined by internal structure alone, which seems to make meaning too easy. The Swampman shows tension between externalist theories of mind, which ground mental content in relations to the world, and internalist intuitions, which suggest that what matters is inside the head. The vagueness of identity. A person loses neurons one at a time due to a slow disease. After each neuron dies, they seem like the same person. There is no moment where identity clearly switches off. But eventually, after losing enough neurons, nothing remains that resembles the original person. Did the person die? When? There is no sharp line. Identity fades gradually, but we treat it as all or nothing. Either someone is the same person or they are not. Either they are alive or dead. But the reality is continuous change without clear boundaries. This is the vagueness of identity, and it appears in many forms. A business changes all its employees and products gradually. At what point does it become a different business? A ship replaces all its parts slowly. When does it become a different ship? You could say, identity is vague. There is no fact of the matter in borderline cases. But this creates problems. Logic assumes identity is precise. Either A equals B or it does not. Vague identity might require revising logic itself. You could say, identity depends on what matters for your purposes. When asking if a business is the same, the answer depends on whether you care about legal continuity, cultural continuity, or something else. Identity is not a fixed fact, but a contextual judgment. The vagueness of identity reveals that our concepts do not carve nature at its joints. Nature provides gradual change. We impose discrete categories, and then struggle when reality does not fit them neatly. The simulation hypothesis. Advanced civilizations might develop technology to create detailed simulations of reality. These simulations could include conscious beings who do not know they are simulated. If this is possible, then there could be vastly more simulated realities than base realities. Most conscious beings would live in simulations. If you are a typical conscious being, you probably live in a simulation. This is the simulation hypothesis. It does not claim we definitely live in a simulation, but it suggests we might, based on probabilistic reasoning. If civilizations create many simulations, simulated beings outnumber real ones, and you should expect to be in the majority. Critics point out that we have no idea how likely it is that civilizations create such simulations. Maybe it is impossible. Maybe civilizations always destroy themselves first. Maybe there are ethical rules against creating simulations with conscious beings. Without knowing these probabilities, we cannot conclude we are likely simulated. Others question whether simulated consciousness is possible. Maybe consciousness requires specific physical processes that cannot be replicated in a computer. But if consciousness is just information processing, then simulations should work. The simulation hypothesis matters because if true, it changes our understanding of reality. The laws of physics might just be the rules of the simulation. History might be recently manufactured. The universe might be much smaller than it appears. We might be able to find glitches or limits in the simulation that reveal its nature. Some say the hypothesis is untestable and therefore not meaningful, but others argue we could look for signs of optimization or simplification that would appear in a simulation but not in base reality. The Euthyphro dilemma. Is something good because the gods approve of it, or do the gods approve of it because it is good? If good means whatever the gods approve, then morality is arbitrary. The gods could approve of anything, and it would become good. Murder could be good if the gods said so. Nothing is inherently right or wrong, just approved or disapproved. If the gods approve of things because they are good, then goodness exists independently of the gods. There is a standard of goodness that even gods must recognize. Morality does not come from the gods. It is something separate that gods respond to. This is the Euthyphro dilemma, and it applies beyond religion. Replace gods with society, evolution, or any source of values. Is something good because society approves, or does society approve because it is good? If morality is whatever society says, then it is arbitrary and changes with social norms. If morality is independent of society, then where does it come from? The dilemma creates problems for anyone who tries to ground morality in an authority. Either the authority is arbitrary, or the authority is not the real source of morality. Some respond that the dilemma is false. Perhaps morality comes from the nature of the gods or the nature of society. It is not arbitrary but also not independent. The character of the source determines what is good. But this just pushes the question back. Why is that character good rather than some other character? The Euthyphro dilemma reveals tension in how we think about moral foundations. We want morality to be both objective and action-guiding. But grounding it in authority makes it seem arbitrary, while making it independent of authority leaves unclear where it comes from. The Gettier problem. You have a justified true belief. You see what looks like a barn and believe there is a barn there. Your belief is justified by visual evidence. The belief is true. There is indeed a barn there. But unknown to you, you are in an area full of fake barn facades. You happen to be looking at the only real barn. Do you know there is a barn? Most people say no. Knowledge requires more than justified true belief. You got lucky. You could easily have been wrong. The Gettier problem shows that the traditional definition of knowledge as justified true belief is insufficient. You can have all three elements and still lack knowledge. Philosophers have tried to add a fourth condition. Maybe knowledge requires that your belief not be accidentally true. Maybe it requires that your justification tracks truth reliably. Maybe it requires that you would not have the belief if it were false. But every proposed solution faces counterexamples. New Gettier cases appear that satisfy the added condition, but still feel like non-knowledge. The Gettier problem has generated massive discussion. It reveals that our intuitive concept of knowledge is more complex than simple definitions capture. Knowledge involves a proper connection between belief and truth, but specifying what counts as proper is difficult. Some respond by abandoning the search for a perfect definition. Knowledge might be a family resemblance concept with no strict, necessary, and sufficient conditions. Or maybe knowledge is contextual, and what counts as knowledge depends on practical stakes and conversational standards. The paradox of analysis. To analyze a concept, you must break it down into simpler parts. An analysis of bachelor might be unmarried man. The analysis is correct if both sides mean the same thing. But if both sides mean the same thing, the analysis tells us nothing new. It is trivial. Bachelor means unmarried man is like saying bachelor means bachelor. Yet analysis is supposed to be informative. It should tell us something we did not already know. How can an analysis be both correct and informative? This is the paradox of analysis. Either the analysis says something new, in which case it changes meaning and is not correct, or it preserves meaning, in which case it says nothing new and is trivial. Some respond that analysis reveals structure without changing meaning. You know what a bachelor is before analysis. But analysis makes explicit the components. It converts implicit knowledge into explicit knowledge. Others say analysis provides synonyms, and synonyms can be informative, even if they have the same meaning. Learning that ophthalmologist means eye doctor tells you something even though they refer to the same thing. Still others deny that correct analyses must be trivial. Meaning is not transparent. Two expressions can have the same meaning without this being obvious. Discovering that they mean the same thing is genuine discovery. The paradox of analysis challenges philosophical methodology. Much of philosophy involves analyzing concepts like knowledge, justice, and goodness. If correct analysis must be trivial, what is philosophy accomplishing? The problem of the many. You are sitting in a chair. Or are you? Look closely, and you see that atoms at the edge of your body are not clearly part of you or part of the air. There is no precise boundary. You could draw the line slightly different ways and get slightly different collections of atoms. Each collection has an equal claim to being you. So there are many things with equal claim to being you, differing by a few atoms at the edges. This is the problem of the many. It seems like there is one object, but close examination reveals many overlapping objects with equal status. The same applies to the chair, the room, every physical object. One response is to say, objects are vague. There is no fact about exactly which atoms compose you. You are roughly this collection of atoms, but the boundaries are not precise. Another response is to say ordinary objects do not really exist. Only fundamental particles exist. Talk about chairs and people is just convenient shorthand for describing patterns of particles. But this seems extreme. We do not want to say people do not exist. A third option is to accept that there really are many overlapping objects. They all exist, and we just pick one to call you for practical purposes. But then reality is much more crowded than we thought. The problem of the many shows that ordinary objects are not as simple as they seem. Individuation and counting require drawing boundaries, but nature does not provide sharp boundaries at the level of atoms and molecules. The paradox of conformation. You have a hypothesis. All ravens are black. To test it, you look for ravens. Each black raven you find supports the hypothesis. Now consider the logically equivalent statement. All non-black things are non-ravens. This means the same thing. If all ravens are black, then anything not black is not a raven. Testing this version should also support the original hypothesis. So you examine non-black things. You find a white shoe. It is non-black and non-raven, confirming the hypothesis. By looking at shoes, you have gathered evidence that all ravens are black. This seems absurd, but the logic is valid. This is the paradox of conformation, and it challenges our understanding of evidence. Why does observing ravens seem to confirm the hypothesis while observing shoes does not, even though logically they should be equivalent? One answer is that context matters. We know shoes are not ravens for independent reasons. Finding a white shoe adds no new information, but finding a black raven does add information because we are genuinely uncertain about raven color. Another response is that conformation is not about logical equivalence. It is about probability. Seeing a black raven increases the probability that all ravens are black by a meaningful amount. Seeing a white shoe also technically increases that probability, but by such a tiny amount as to be negligible. There are vastly more non-black things than ravens, so checking them is inefficient. The paradox reveals that scientific confirmation is more subtle than simple logic suggests. Evidence must be evaluated in context with background knowledge and practical constraints. The problem of divine hiddenness. If a perfectly loving being exists and wants a relationship with people, why is that being hidden? Why is existence not obvious? Many people search sincerely for evidence and find none. They do not reject through stubbornness or sin. They honestly see no reason to believe, but a loving being would not hide from those genuinely seeking. The being would make existence clear and accessible to all. The fact that honest seekers fail to find suggests either no such being exists or the being is not perfectly loving. This is the problem of divine hiddenness. It is distinct from the problem of evil. Evil asks why bad things happen. Hiddenness asks why belief is so difficult. Some respond that belief must be chosen freely. If existence were obvious, people would have no choice but to believe. The hiddenness preserves freedom. But this seems weak. Knowing someone exists does not eliminate freedom in your relationship with them. You know your family exists, but you still choose how to relate to them. Others say divine hiddenness serves a purpose. It tests faith. It requires trust. It makes belief more valuable because it is harder. But would a loving being really play hide and seek with people desperately searching? Would love require unnecessary difficulty? Another response is that divine reality is not hidden. It is evident in nature, conscience, and experience. People who do not find it are not looking in the right way, but this seems to blame seekers for the being's hiddenness. The problem of divine hiddenness suggests that perfect love and hiddenness are in tension. If the being exists and is loving, we would expect more evidence and less ambiguity. The doctrine of double effect. A doctor can give a patient pain medication that will ease suffering but also hasten death. Is this acceptable? The doctrine of double effect says it depends on intention. If the doctor intends to relieve pain and merely foresees that death will come sooner, the action is acceptable. If the doctor intends to kill the patient, even to end suffering, the action is wrong. The intended effect must be good. The bad effect must be merely foreseen, not intended. This doctrine distinguishes between what you aim at and what you allow to happen. It says that causing death as a side effect is different from causing death as a goal. Critics argue this distinction is too subtle. In both cases, you knowingly cause death. Whether you call it intended or foreseen does not change the reality. You are choosing an action that you know will kill. Others say the doctrine captures a real moral difference. There is something worse about killing someone deliberately than about allowing them to die as a side effect of helping them. The first treats the person as a means to an end. The second respects them while dealing with a tragic situation. The doctrine of double effect appears throughout ethics. Is bombing a military target with civilian casualties morally different from bombing civilians directly? Is removing life support to stop prolonging death different from actively causing death? The doctrine says yes. Intention matters. But critics worry this makes morality too much about internal mental states rather than external consequences. What actually happens seems more important than what you were thinking when you caused it to happen. The paradox of hedonism. Happiness is good, so you decide to pursue happiness directly. You focus on pleasure and avoiding pain. But the more you focus on being happy, the less happy you become. Constantly monitoring your happiness level makes you self-conscious and dissatisfied. Always seeking pleasure makes it less satisfying when you get it. Paradoxically, the direct pursuit of happiness often leads to unhappiness. This is the paradox of hedonism. The things that make you happy usually do so as side effects. You become happy by pursuing meaningful work, relationships, and activities, not by pursuing happiness itself. Happiness comes from engaging with the world, not from attending to your own mental states. Some say this shows hedonism is wrong. If directly pursuing pleasure leads to less pleasure, then pleasure is not the right goal. Perhaps meaning, virtue, or achievement matter more than feeling good. Others say the paradox just shows that we are bad at pursuing pleasure directly. The right strategy is to pursue the things that reliably produce pleasure, even if you do not focus on the pleasure itself. Hedonism can be true even if direct pleasure-seeking is a poor strategy. The paradox also appears in other areas. The more you try to fall asleep, the harder it becomes. The more you try to be spontaneous, the less spontaneous you are. The more you try to not think about something, the more you think about it. Sometimes, the best way to achieve a goal is to not aim at it directly, but to create conditions where it arises naturally. The Sorites paradox in ethics. 1 cent is not enough money to make you rich. Adding 1 more cent does not make you rich either. In fact, adding 1 cent never seems to turn non-rich into rich. Yet clearly someone with $1 billion is rich. By repeated applications of adding 1 cent does not make you rich, you can argue that no amount of money makes you rich. This is the Sorites paradox applied to ethical concepts. The same problem appears with moral terms. Killing 1 innocent person for no reason is clearly wrong. What about killing 1 person to save 2 lives? What about killing 1 to save 3? At some number, killing 1 to save many becomes acceptable. But there seems to be no precise line where the wrongness flips to rightness. Moral concepts have fuzzy boundaries just like Heap and Rich. This creates practical problems. Law and ethics often require drawing lines. You can vote at 18 but not 17. You can be executed for murder but not for assault. These lines are somewhat arbitrary, and the Sorites paradox reveals that arbitrariness. One response is to accept that moral concepts are vague. There is no exact answer to when something becomes wrong or right in borderline cases. We must make pragmatic decisions and accept that they could reasonably be drawn differently. Another response is to say, vagueness shows these concepts are subjective or cultural. Different societies can draw lines in different places, and neither is objectively correct. But many want to preserve moral objectivity. They want to say that moral truths exist, even if we have trouble identifying them precisely. The Sorites paradox in ethics reveals tension between our desire for objective moral truth and the reality that moral language is often vague and context-dependent. The sleeping beauty problem. You are put to sleep. A coin is flipped. If it lands heads, you are woken once, and the experiment ends. If it lands tails, you are woken twice, with your memory erased between wakings. You wake up during the experiment. What should your credence be that the coin landed heads? One answer is 1/2. The coin is fair. Nothing you learn by waking up changes the probability it landed heads. The chance was 50% before the experiment, and it is 50% now. Another answer is 1/3. There are 3 possible wakings: heads first waking, tails first waking, and tails second waking. You cannot tell which one you are experiencing. By symmetry, each is equally likely from your perspective. 2 of the 3 involve tails, so the probability of tails is 2/3. This is the sleeping beauty problem, and it divides probability theorists. Both answers have strong arguments. The halfer position respects the fact that the coin is fair and your evidence has not changed. The thirder position respects the fact that you are more likely to be experiencing a tails waking simply because there are more of them. The problem matters because it reveals ambiguity in how to update beliefs with indexical information, NEHIS, information about where you are in a scenario. Different rules for updating can give different answers, and it is unclear which rule is correct. Some say the disagreement is merely verbal. Halfers and thirders mean different things by probability. Clarify the question and they will agree. Others say this is a genuine puzzle about rational belief that cannot be dissolved. The sleeping beauty problem connects to issues in quantum mechanics, multiverse theories, and artificial intelligence, where similar questions about probabilistic reasoning arise. The Newcomb problem. 2 boxes sit before you. Box A is transparent and contains $1,000. Box B is opaque. A predictor has studied your brain and predicted your choice. If the predictor predicted you will take both boxes, box B is empty. If the predictor predicted you will take only box B, it contains $1 million. The predictor has been right in thousands of previous cases. What do you choose? One reasoning says, take both boxes. Either box B has money or it does not. That is already determined. Taking both gives you whatever is in box B plus 1,000 extra. Taking only box B might give you nothing. 2 boxes is better than 1. Another reasoning says take only box B. The predictor is nearly always right. If you are the kind of person who takes both boxes, The predictor knew that and left box B empty. If you are the kind of person who takes only box B, the predictor put 1,000,000 in it. 1 boxers walk away rich, 2 boxers get 1,000. This is Newcomb's problem, and it creates a split between decision theories. Causal decision theory says take both boxes because your choice cannot change what is already in the box. Evidential decision theory says take 1 box because doing so is evidence that box B contains 1,000,000. The problem challenges our understanding of rationality. Both arguments seem valid, yet they reach opposite conclusions. The issue involves whether you should consider only the causal effects of your choice or also the evidential correlation between your choice and outcomes. Some say the problem is really about free will. If the predictor can predict you perfectly, you have no real choice. But if the prediction is less than perfect, 2-boxing starts to look better. The Newcomb problem has no settled answer. It reveals deep uncertainty about how to make decisions when your choice correlates with background facts, even if it does not cause them. The lottery paradox. A lottery has 1,000,000 tickets and 1 winner. You hold ticket 1. It is rational to believe ticket 1 will not win. The probability is 0.9999999. The same reasoning applies to every ticket. It is rational to believe ticket 2 will not win, ticket 3 will not win, and so on. You rationally believe that no ticket will win. But you also know that some ticket must win. You hold contradictory beliefs, both of which seem rational. This is the lottery paradox. It challenges the principle that rational belief is closed under conjunction. If you rationally believe A and rationally believe B, it seems you should rationally believe A and B together. But the lottery shows this leads to contradiction. You rationally believe of each ticket that it will not win, but you should not believe all tickets will lose. Some respond by rejecting high probability as sufficient for rational belief. Maybe you should not believe ticket 1 will lose just because it is very likely. You should remain agnostic about individual tickets. But this seems too strict. It would prevent us from believing many things we reasonably take for granted. Others say rational belief is not closed under conjunction. You can rationally believe many things individually without rationally believing their conjunction. This solves the paradox, but challenges our understanding of rationality. Still others distinguish between belief and acceptance. You can accept that each ticket will lose for practical purposes without truly believing it in the full sense. The lottery paradox reveals tension between probability and belief. High probability seems like it should justify belief. But when many high probability propositions combine, contradiction emerges. The precautionary principle. When considering a new technology or policy, some argue we should be cautious. If there is a risk of serious harm, we should not proceed unless we can prove it is safe. This is the precautionary principle. It shifts the burden of proof. Instead of waiting for evidence of harm, we demand evidence of safety first. The principle seems wise for things like releasing new chemicals or building dangerous facilities. Better safe than sorry. But the principle creates problems. Almost any action has some risk. Inaction also has risks. Not developing new medicine risks, leaving diseases uncured. Not building infrastructure risks accidents from old systems. The precautionary principle could prevent all action by demanding impossible proof of zero risk. It also focuses attention on novel risks, while ignoring familiar ones. We accept enormous risks from cars because we are used to them, but we panic over tiny risks from new technologies because they trigger precautionary thinking. This leads to poor prioritization. Strong versions of the principle are self-defeating. Not acting has consequences that must also be considered. Weak versions are too vague to guide decisions. What counts as sufficient proof of safety? How much risk is acceptable? The precautionary principle works as a reminder to consider risks seriously, but as a decision rule, it provides little guidance and can lead to irrational risk aversion. The challenge is balancing caution with progress, avoiding both recklessness and paralysis. The mere addition paradox. A world contains 10 billion people living excellent lives. Compare this to a world with 10 billion people living excellent lives plus 1 billion people living lives barely worth living. The second world has more total happiness and more people with positive experiences. It seems better. Now, compare to a world where all 11 billion people live pretty good lives, not excellent but better than barely worth living. This seems better still. Total happiness is more evenly distributed. Keep adding people with okay lives and redistributing happiness to make things more equal. Eventually, you reach a world with 1 trillion people living mediocre lives. By repeated small improvements, you went from 10 billion people with excellent lives to 1 trillion people with mediocre lives. Each step seemed to make things better, but the endpoint seems worse than the start. This is the mere addition paradox. It shows that principles which seem reasonable in isolation can lead to unacceptable conclusions when applied repeatedly. The problem is similar to the repugnant conclusion, but focuses on the step-by-step reasoning. You cannot point to a single step that is wrong, yet the cumulative result is wrong. Some respond by rejecting the idea that adding happy people always makes things better. Quality matters more than quantity, even if the added people have positive experiences. Others accept the conclusion. Maybe 1 trillion mediocre lives really is better than 10 billion excellent ones. Our intuitions rebel against this, because we imagine living a mediocre life ourselves. But from an impartial perspective, more happiness is more happiness. The mere addition paradox forces clarity about population ethics. What should we maximize? How should we value quality versus quantity? The answers have implications for decisions about family size, resource distribution, and long-term planning. The problem of induction with laws. Science discovers laws of nature. Water boils at 100 degrees. Gravity follows an inverse square law. These laws are based on observations. We see them hold in many cases and conclude they are universal. But this reasoning assumes the future will resemble the past. It assumes unobserved cases will match observed ones. This is induction, and we have no justification for it beyond the fact that it has worked before, which is itself an inductive argument. But there is a deeper problem. Why do we infer laws rather than other patterns? After seeing the sun rise every day, we could conclude, the sun rises on days I observe, rather than, the sun rises every day. Both fit the data equally well. But we choose the simpler, more general pattern. Why? Some say simplicity is a sign of truth. Nature follows simple laws, so simple explanations are more likely correct. But this assumes nature is simple, which we cannot prove without circular reasoning. Others say we choose general laws because they are more useful for prediction. But this makes law discovery pragmatic, rather than truth tracking. We believe general laws not because they are true, but because they are convenient. The problem suggests that law discovery involves assumptions beyond what data justifies. We import ideas about simplicity, generality, and naturalness. These ideas work well in practice, but their justification remains mysterious. Science rests on principles we cannot fully defend, though abandoning them would make science impossible. The epistemic regress problem. You believe something. To be justified, you need a reason. Your reason is another belief. But that belief also needs justification. That justification is another belief needing justification. This continues forever. You either have an infinite chain of reasons, or you reach a belief you cannot justify, or your reasons eventually circle back to the original belief. All three options seem bad. Infinite chains are impossible to complete. Unjustified foundations are arbitrary. Circular reasoning is fallacious. This is the epistemic regress problem, and it threatens the possibility of justified belief. Foundationalists say some beliefs are self-justifying. They need no further support. These foundations might be sense experiences, logical truths, or evident principles. Everything else is justified by building on foundations. But critics ask why foundations are exempt from needing justification. What makes them special? Coherentists say beliefs justify each other through mutual support. A web of beliefs that fit together well is justified, even if no individual belief is foundational. But critics ask how coherence produces justification. You could have a coherent set of false beliefs. Infinitists bite the bullet and accept infinite chains. Each belief is justified by the next, without end. This seems impossible for finite minds, but maybe we possess infinite implicit justification we draw on as needed. The regress problem has no universally accepted solution. It reveals that justification is puzzling. We want knowledge to rest on solid foundations, but we cannot find foundations that are both solid and non-arbitrary. The problem applies to moral knowledge, scientific knowledge, and everyday beliefs. It challenges whether we really know anything at all. The fission problem. Your brain is carefully split, and each half is placed in a new body. Both halves function normally. Both resulting people have your memories and personality. Both claim to be you. Which one is you? If you say both, then you have become two people. But that seems impossible. You were one person before the split. How can one person become two? If you say neither, then you died during a procedure that kept your brain functioning. That seems wrong. Nothing important was destroyed. If you say one is you and the other is not, which one? They are identical. Any basis for choosing seems arbitrary. The fission problem reveals that personal identity cannot be what we thought. We cannot be identical to our brain, because the brain can split. We cannot be identical to our psychology, because psychology can be duplicated. We cannot be a physical continuity, because continuity can branch. Some say personal identity is not what matters. What matters is psychological continuity, and both resulting people have that. Survival does not require identity. You should care equally about both future people. Others say fission shows that people do not really exist as persistent entities. There are just momentary stages connected by physical and psychological relations. Identity over time is a useful fiction, but not deep truth. The fission problem is not just hypothetical. Brain damage can separate the hemispheres. Rare cases of hemisphere removal show that each half can sustain consciousness. The question of what happens in fission is not just philosophical but potentially practical. It forces us to reconsider what we are and what matters for survival. The publicity principle. Moral rules should be public. Everyone should know what the rules are. This is the publicity principle, and it seems obviously right. How can you follow rules you do not know? But publicity creates problems for some moral theories. Suppose the best consequences come from most people following Rule A, but some people secretly following Rule B. Publicizing Rule B would ruin its effectiveness. Should the theory remain secret? If yes, then morality has an esoteric element that conflicts with publicity. If no, then we sacrifice good consequences for the sake of transparency. Rule utilitarianism faces this problem. Maybe the best rules are ones that most people follow most of the time, but not rules that everyone follows perfectly. Public rules should be simple and broadly applicable, even if ideal rules would be complex and situation-specific. But then ordinary people follow the public rules while philosophers know the real rules are different. This creates a two-tier morality that seems elitist. Some moral theories essentially require secrecy. If everyone tried to act on them, they would fail. This suggests the theories are self-effacing. They recommend not believing themselves. The publicity principle matters for political legitimacy too. Laws should be public so people can know what is required and consent to be governed. Secret laws are tyrannical. But should the reasoning behind laws also be public? What if the true justification is complicated or unpalatable? The publicity principle pushes towards simple, transparent moral and political systems, even if more complex systems might work better in theory. The possibility of zombies. A philosophical zombie is a being physically identical to a conscious person, but without any inner experience. It behaves exactly like a conscious being. It talks, acts, and responds appropriately. But the lights are not on inside. There is no what it is like to be the zombie. Are zombies possible? If yes, then consciousness is something extra beyond physical processes. You could have all the brain activity and behavior without the consciousness. This suggests consciousness cannot be reduced to or explained by physical facts alone. If no, then consciousness is necessarily tied to certain physical processes. Wherever you have the right physical structure and function, consciousness must be present. This supports physicalism, the view that everything is physical. The zombie argument says that since zombies are conceivable, they are possible. We can coherently imagine a zombie world without contradiction. And if zombies are possible, physicalism is false. Consciousness is not a physical property. Critics respond that conceivability does not guarantee possibility. You can conceive of water that is not H2O, but that is not actually possible once you understand what water is. Similarly, you might conceive of zombies only because you do not fully understand consciousness. Others say zombies are not genuinely conceivable. When you think you are imagining a zombie, you are really imagining something subtly different, a being that seems conscious but is not a being that has all the functional properties of consciousness but lacks consciousness itself. The zombie debate matters because it determines whether consciousness can be explained scientifically. If zombies are possible, science might describe brain processes but never explain why there is subjective experience. A gap would remain that physical theories cannot cross. The paradox of fiction and morality. You watch a movie where a character plans to murder someone. You hope the character succeeds because they are the protagonist and you want the story to go well. But if someone told you about a real person planning real murder, you would be horrified. How can the same action be good in fiction and bad in reality? Some say we do not really endorse fictional murder. We engage with the story as a story, not as a blueprint for reality. Our emotional engagement is quarantined from our actual values. But this quarantine is imperfect. Stories shape our values. We learn moral lessons from fiction. Heroes and villains teach us right and wrong. If fiction were completely disconnected from morality, it could not have this influence. Others say we endorse fictional murder in a special sense. We want it within the context of the story for aesthetic or narrative reasons. This does not mean we think murder is good overall. It means we think this particular story is better with the murder in it. But where does this better as a story evaluation come from? If the story becomes better when evil succeeds, does that make evil aesthetically good even if morally bad? That seems strange. The paradox reveals tension between aesthetic and moral evaluation. We use similar language: good, bad, better, worse, but they come apart in fiction. A morally bad act can be aesthetically good for a story. This raises questions about whether aesthetic and moral values are fundamentally different kinds of values or whether they share a deeper commonality. The paradox of omnipotence. An omnipotent being can do anything. Can such a being create a stone so heavy that the being cannot lift it? If yes, then there is something the being cannot do: lift the stone. If no, then there is something the being cannot do: create the unliftable stone. Either way, there is something the being cannot do. So omnipotence is impossible. This is the paradox of omnipotence, and it challenges the coherence of unlimited power. Some respond that omnipotence means the ability to do anything that is logically possible. Creating a stone an omnipotent being cannot lift is impossible, like creating a married bachelor. The being's inability to do it reflects logic, not a limitation of power. Others say the paradox trades on a scope ambiguity. Can the being create a stone that it cannot lift, or can the being create a stone that it cannot lift? The first asks if there is a stone beyond the being's lifting ability. The second asks if the being can create, while also restricting its future abilities. Properly parsed, the paradox dissolves. Still others argue that omnipotence does not require doing literally anything. It requires maximal power, more power than any other being. If some things are impossible by nature, then not doing them does not limit omnipotence. The paradox matters for theology. If omnipotence is incoherent, then perfect beings cannot exist. But defenders argue that the paradox shows only that unlimited power must be properly understood, not that it is impossible. Like many paradoxes, the resolution depends on how carefully you define your terms. The trolley problem variations. 5 people are tied to a track. A trolley is speeding toward them. You can pull a lever to divert it to another track where it will kill one person. Do you pull the lever? Most say yes. Now change it. 5 people are tied to a track. You are on a bridge with a large person. You can push the person off the bridge to stop the trolley, killing the person but saving the 5. Do you push? Most say no. Here is another. 5 people need organ transplants or they will die. You can kill one healthy person and use their organs to save the 5. Do you kill the one? Most say no. But why? In all cases, you can save 5 lives by causing one death. Yet pulling a lever feels different from pushing someone, which feels different from harvesting organs. The variations suggest that our moral intuitions track more than just numbers. Directness matters. Whether you use someone as a means matters. Whether the harm is a side effect or a direct goal matters. But critics point out that these distinctions are hard to justify. Dead is dead. If numbers matter, they should matter the same way in each case. If 5 lives outweigh 1, this should hold regardless of the method. The trolley variations reveal that we have conflicting moral principles. We think consequences matter, but we also think the way you produce consequences matters. We think all lives have equal value, but we treat some deaths as worse than others based on how they occur. The variations do not have agreed-upon answers. They expose disagreement and inconsistency in moral thinking that we must somehow navigate. The metaethical regress. An action is wrong because it causes suffering. Causing suffering is wrong because suffering is bad. Suffering is bad because, why? Eventually, moral explanation must stop. Either some things are just primitively good or bad, or moral claims reduce to non-moral facts, or the chain continues forever, or it loops back on itself. The first option says morality has foundational facts that need no further justification. But what makes these facts foundational? Why should we accept them? The second option tries to define good in terms of something else: evolution, desire, social agreement. But then why is that other thing good? You can always ask the further question. The third option accepts infinite moral justifications. Every moral fact is explained by another moral fact forever. But finite minds cannot complete infinite chains. How can we know any moral claim if the justification never ends? The fourth option makes morality circular. Something is good because it promotes flourishing, and flourishing is good because it is good. This seems to explain nothing. This is the metaethical regress, and it parallels the epistemic regress. Just as belief needs justification that needs justification, moral claims need grounding that needs grounding. All theories must choose how to stop the regress, and each way is problematic. Some embrace moral foundationalism. There are self-evident moral truths that need no further justification, but people disagree about what is self-evident, which undermines the appeal to self-evidence. Others embrace moral naturalism. Moral facts reduced to natural facts about well-being, evolution, or rationality. But this seems to change the subject rather than explain morality. The regress reveals that moral knowledge is mysterious. We make moral judgments confidently, but cannot fully justify them. The foundations of ethics remain uncertain. The grounding problem. Everything that exists has some explanation. The chair exists because materials were shaped and assembled. The materials exist because atoms bonded. The atoms exist because of quantum fields. But this chain of explanations must end somewhere. Either there is something that exists without explanation, or the chain continues forever, or it loops back on itself. All three options are troubling. Unexplained existence seems arbitrary. Infinite chains are hard to comprehend. Circular explanation is suspicious. This is the grounding problem, and it applies to all of reality. What grounds the existence of the universe? Theists say a necessary being grounds everything else. This being exists by its nature and needs no further explanation. But critics ask why a necessary being is less arbitrary than a necessary universe. Why does giving the foundation a name solve the problem? Others say the universe itself is the foundation. It exists without explanation. This is a brute fact we must accept, but this feels unsatisfying. We want to know why there is something rather than nothing. Another option is an infinite regress of causes, each explained by the one before, but this just pushes the mystery back without solving it. The grounding problem reveals that existence itself is puzzling. We live in a reality that seems to demand explanation, but cannot be fully explained. Either explanation stops somewhere arbitrary, or it continues forever without final resolution. No option fully satisfies our desire for ultimate understanding. The problem of moral luck. Two people drive drunk. One makes it home safely. The other hits and kills a pedestrian. Should they be judged differently? Most people say the killer is more blameworthy. But the difference in outcome was pure luck. Both drove drunk. Both took the same risk. Both showed the same bad judgment. The only difference is what happened afterward, which was outside their control. This is moral luck, the idea that factors beyond our control affect our moral status. It appears everywhere. You are born with certain temperament and abilities. You face certain circumstances and temptations. Your actions have consequences you did not intend or foresee. How much of what happens is really up to you? If moral responsibility requires control, and most of life is outside our control, then moral responsibility might be impossible. We would all be victims of circumstance, unable to claim credit or blame for anything. Some respond by biting the bullet. The two drunk drivers are equally blameworthy. The fact that one killed someone is relevant to consequences but not to moral judgment. We should judge people by what they tried to do and what they controlled, not by how things turned out. Others say results do matter. Actions are not just inner will but outer effects. You cannot separate someone's deed from what actually happened. Part of the moral status of an action is determined by its real impact on the world. The problem of moral luck reveals deep confusion about responsibility. We want to say people are responsible only for what they control, but we also judge people differently based on outcomes they did not control. These two intuitions conflict, and it is unclear how to reconcile them. The mere means principle. A fundamental moral rule says you must never treat people merely as means to an end. Always treat them also as ends in themselves. This means respecting their autonomy, rationality, and goals. You can interact with people instrumentally, hire them, buy from them, ask them for help, but you must also acknowledge them as agents with their own purposes, not just tools for your purposes. The principle sounds clear but is hard to apply. When you hire someone, are you treating them as a mere means? They want the job, so you are also respecting their ends. But you hired them for your benefit, using them as a means. When does using someone cross the line into using them merely? Some say the key is consent. If people voluntarily agree to help you, you are not treating them as mere means. Coercion or deception treats people as mere means because it bypasses their rational agency. But consent is not always clear. Someone might agree to something because they have no good alternative. Economic necessity creates pressure that resembles coercion. Is such consent genuine? Others say the test is whether you would want the same treatment if positions were reversed. If you would accept being treated this way, you are not treating the other person as a mere means. But self-interest might make you a bad judge. You might rationalize treatment you inflict that you would hate to receive. The mere means principle captures an important moral intuition. People have dignity and should not be used like objects. But translating this into clear guidance is difficult. Almost all human interaction involves some instrumental use of each other. Drawing the line between acceptable use and degrading mere means remains a challenge. The repugnant conclusion. Redux. For any population living excellent lives, there is a larger population living barely worth living lives that is better. This is the repugnant conclusion, and it haunts population ethics. You can try to avoid it by saying quality matters more than quantity. But then you get the sadistic conclusion. A small population experiencing extreme suffering is better than a large population experiencing mild suffering, plus many people with great lives. You can try to avoid both by adopting a person-affecting view, only make people better off relative to existing people. But then you cannot say that creating happy people is good. You get counterintuitive results about whether to bring new people into existence. Every approach to population ethics leads somewhere uncomfortable. We have no theory that matches all our intuitions about when adding people makes the world better or worse. The problem matters practically. Should we have more children? Should we support population growth? Should we colonize space to create enormous populations? The answer depends on whether more happy people makes things better, and we have no settled view on this. Some think the repugnant conclusion should be accepted. Our intuitions against it are unreliable. More good experiences really are better than fewer, even if distributed across many mediocre lives. Others think population ethics is just extremely hard, and we should accept that no theory will satisfy all intuitions. We must prioritize some intuitions over others and accept counterintuitive implications. The repugnant conclusion shows that adding population size as a variable makes ethics vastly more complex. The problem of perception. You see a tree. What are you directly aware of? Some say you are aware of the tree itself. Perception puts you in contact with external objects. Others say you are aware of a mental representation of the tree. You never perceive objects directly, only your mind's picture of them. The first view is called direct realism. It seems to match experience. You feel like you are seeing the tree, not a picture of the tree, but it faces problems. Illusions and hallucinations can make you see things that are not there. If perception sometimes produces experiences without external objects, how do you know it ever connects to external objects? The second view is called indirect realism, or representationalism. It explains illusions easily. Your mental representation can misrepresent, but it creates a veil between you and reality. If you only ever perceive your own mental states, how do you know external objects exist at all? You could be a brain in a vat producing representations without any external world to represent. Some try a middle path. Perception is a process that normally connects you to external objects, but it can misfire. When working properly, you are aware of the tree directly. When malfunctioning, you are aware of mere representations. But this hybrid view faces questions about what working properly means. Is there a fact about what perception is supposed to do, or is that just a human judgment? The problem of perception is ancient, but unresolved. We rely on perception constantly but cannot quite explain how it works, or whether it gives us knowledge of reality. Every theory has costs, and none fully captures how perception seems from the inside. The paradox of analysis returns. When you analyze a concept, you must state necessary and sufficient conditions. Being a triangle means being a closed, three-sided figure. But if this analysis is correct, then triangle and closed three-sided figure mean the same thing. The analysis should be trivial, like saying triangles are triangles. Yet analysis is supposed to be informative. It should tell us something we did not know. How can it be both correct, meaning preserving, and informative, meaning revealing? One answer is that analysis explicates structure without changing meaning. You knew what triangles were before analysis, but analysis makes explicit the components of your concept. Knowledge becomes more clear without becoming different. But if you already possess the analyzed concept, in what sense did analysis teach you anything? The information was already there. Another answer is that correct analysis can be surprising. Two concepts can pick out the same thing without this being obvious. Discovering they coincide is genuine discovery. But then how do we know when an analysis is correct? If meaning is not transparent, what makes one analysis right and another wrong? The paradox suggests that conceptual analysis might not be the powerful tool philosophers thought. If analysis is trivial, it reveals nothing new. If it is substantial, it changes meaning and is not really analysis. Either way, the philosophical method of analyzing concepts into necessary and sufficient conditions faces deep problems. Some philosophers have abandoned analysis entirely, focusing instead on empirical investigation or practical application. Others defend analysis but acknowledge it is more complex and fallible than originally thought. The right to parenthood. People claim a right to have children, but creating a person affects that person profoundly. The child has no say in being born or who their parents are. Can you have a right to make a decision that so deeply affects someone else without their consent? Some argue that reproductive rights are fundamental. Your body, your choice. The decision to create life is deeply personal and should not be controlled by others. But this seems to treat the resulting person as irrelevant. Decisions about reproduction are decisions about someone else's entire existence. Surely that person's interests matter. Others say parents have obligations to children they create. As long as you can provide a decent life, you have a right to become a parent. But what counts as decent? What if you know you will pass on a serious genetic disease? What if you are likely to be a terrible parent due to addiction or mental illness? Children do not choose their circumstances. They get whatever they are born into. Is it fair to create someone in conditions that will make their life very difficult? Some respond that even a difficult life is better than no life at all. You benefit someone by bringing them into existence, unless their life is worse than not existing. But it is unclear how to compare existence to non-existence. How bad must a life be to be not worth living? The right to parenthood conflicts with the welfare of children. We want to respect reproductive freedom. We also want to protect children from predictable harm. These values do not always align, and we have no clear way to balance them. The impossibility of moral expertise. Can someone be a moral expert? Doctors are experts about medicine, engineers are experts about structures, but morality is different. Moral questions seem like questions everyone can engage with equally. No special training makes you better at determining right and wrong. Some argue moral expertise exists. Philosophers study ethics carefully. They understand arguments and theories. They can identify fallacies and inconsistencies. This makes them better at moral reasoning than ordinary people. But critics respond that understanding arguments is not the same as moral knowledge. A philosopher might be expert at logic while being morally terrible. Knowing ethical theories does not make you know what is right. Others say moral expertise requires moral experience, not just intellectual study. People who have faced hard choices and lived through consequences develop moral wisdom. But what kind of experience makes you expert? Living through something does not guarantee you understood it correctly. Another problem is that morality lacks clear methods for settling disagreement. In science, experiments resolve disputes. In mathematics, proofs demonstrate truths. But in ethics, people can disagree endlessly without any procedure, forcing resolution. If moral experts disagree, how do we tell who is right? The impossibility of moral expertise suggests morality might be fundamentally different from other domains. Perhaps moral questions do not have expert answers. Perhaps they require personal judgment that cannot be outsourced to authorities. This has implications for education, law, and public policy. If no one is a moral expert, then whose moral views should guide institutions? The threshold problem. When does a group of cells become a person? There is no sharp line. A fertilized egg is not clearly a person. An adult is clearly a person. Somewhere in between, personhood begins. But where? At conception? At heartbeat? At brain activity? At birth? At self-awareness? Every proposed threshold seems arbitrary. One day earlier, and the same reasoning would apply. One cell fewer, and nothing important has changed. Yet we need a threshold for law and ethics. Abortion law must draw a line somewhere. Medical decisions about end of life must determine when personhood ends. Without thresholds, we cannot create clear rules. Some respond that vague boundaries are acceptable. Not everything needs sharp lines. We can say a fetus gradually becomes more person-like without specifying an exact moment, but gradual change creates practical problems. Law cannot say it is somewhat wrong depending on exactly when. Rules need precision even if nature provides only continuity. Others say the threshold should be wherever we conventionally decide to place it. There is no fact of the matter, so we choose based on practical and moral considerations. But this makes personhood seem arbitrary. It suggests being a person is just a label we apply, not a deep truth about beings. Another approach is to avoid thresholds entirely. Instead of asking when personhood begins, ask what matters morally at each stage. Early fetuses matter less than late ones. Infants matter more than embryos. This scalar approach avoids sharp lines but creates new problems. How do you compare the value of beings at different stages? The threshold problem appears throughout ethics. When does a child become responsible for their actions? When does someone become too old to drive? When does punishment become torture? Nature provides spectrums. Ethics requires divisions. Reconciling these is unavoidable but unsolvable. The asymmetry between pain and pleasure. Creating a person who will suffer seems bad. You are bringing suffering into existence. But creating a person who will be happy seems neutral, not obligatory. You have not made anything worse by not creating them. This asymmetry is puzzling. If creating suffering is bad, why is creating happiness not good? If creating happiness is neutral, why is creating suffering not also neutral? Some defend the asymmetry. When a person exists and suffers, that is bad for them. But when a person does not exist, there is no one for whom happiness would be good. Non-existence, people have no interests. You cannot benefit something that does not exist. But this reasoning is tricky. If creating a happy person is not good because the person did not exist before, why is creating a suffering person bad? The person did not exist before to be harmed by coming into existence. Others reject the asymmetry. Creating happiness is good, just as creating suffering is bad. Both should count in our decisions about reproduction. But rejecting the asymmetry leads to strange conclusions. It suggests we have strong reasons to create as many happy people as possible. Population growth becomes a moral imperative. The asymmetry matters for decisions about having children. If creating suffering is bad, but creating happiness is neutral, then you need strong reasons to have children. The risk of suffering might outweigh the benefit of happiness. But if creating happiness is good, then having children can be a moral positive as long as their lives are worth living. The asymmetry also affects how we think about extinction. If creating happiness matters, then humanity ending is a loss of all future value. If creating happiness is neutral, then extinction is neutral, as long as existing people do not suffer. No agreed solution exists. Our intuitions about creating people are confused and contradictory. The problem of divine command theory. If morality comes from divine commands, then whatever is commanded is right. But this makes morality arbitrary. The commands could be anything. Murder could be right if commanded. Nothing is inherently good or bad, just approved or disapproved. This seems wrong. We think some things are evil, regardless of who commands them. Yet if morality is independent of divine commands, then where does it come from? What makes things right or wrong if not divine will? Believers want morality to depend on the divine, yet not be arbitrary. Some respond that divine nature constrains divine commands. The commands flow from perfect goodness, so they cannot be arbitrary. But this assumes goodness is independent of the commands. You are measuring commands against a standard of goodness that exists separately. Then the commands are not really the source of morality. Others say divine commands constitute morality without making it arbitrary. Right means commanded, but what is commanded flows necessarily from divine nature. The nature is necessary, not arbitrary, so morality is necessary too. But this seems to just push arbitrariness to the divine nature. Why is that nature good rather than some other nature? Another response is to bite the bullet. Morality is indeed whatever is commanded. This seems arbitrary to us because we are not the commander. From the divine perspective, the commands reflect perfect wisdom. We should trust them even when we do not understand. But this requires enormous faith. It means accepting that torture could be good, slavery could be right, if commanded. Many find this unacceptable. Divine command theory tries to ground morality in something absolute and authoritative, but it struggles to avoid making morality either arbitrary or independent of the very thing it is supposed to depend on. The problem of evil revisited. Perhaps evil exists for soul-making. Suffering builds character. Challenges create virtues like courage and compassion. Without evil, people would be shallow and undeveloped. But must there be so much evil? Could people not develop character with less intense suffering? Must children die of disease for adults to learn compassion? A perfect being could surely achieve soul-making with less horror. Perhaps evil is necessary for free will. Beings with genuine choice must be able to choose evil. A world of free creatures must include the possibility of wrong choices. But this does not explain natural evil. Earthquakes and cancers are not chosen. No one's free will requires children to suffer from birth defects. Perhaps suffering is punishment for wrongdoing. People suffer because they or their ancestors sinned. But this makes innocent suffering impossible by definition. Every sufferer must deserve it. This conflicts with obvious cases of unjust suffering. Perhaps we cannot understand divine purposes. What seems evil to us might serve goods we cannot grasp. Suffering that looks pointless might have meaning in the larger plan. But if the plan is incomprehensible to us, how do we know it exists? This response asks us to trust despite having no evidence. It makes good and evil meaningless, if anything could secretly be good. The problem of evil remains the strongest challenge to belief in a perfect being. Every response seems to either limit power, limit knowledge, or limit goodness. The combination of all three attributes plus the existence of evil creates tension that has not been resolved despite thousands of years of attempts. The problem of forgotten causes. You make a choice that causes an effect years later. But by the time the effect occurs, you have forgotten making the choice. Are you still responsible? Most people say yes. Your past action caused the outcome, so you bear responsibility regardless of memory. But this conflicts with another intuition. Responsibility seems connected to identity. You are responsible for what you did. But if you do not remember doing it, in what sense did you do it? The person who acted is psychologically distant from your current self. Some cases make this vivid. A person commits a crime, then suffers brain damage that erases all memory and changes their personality completely. The person who exists now has no psychological connection to the person who committed the crime. Should they be punished? Legal systems say yes. The body is the same. Physical continuity grounds responsibility. But this seems to punish one person for what a different person did. Others argue psychological continuity matters more than physical continuity. If your psychology has changed completely, you are not really the same person. The earlier person should be held responsible, but that person no longer exists. But this makes responsibility dependent on memory and psychology. Criminals could escape responsibility by forgetting their crimes or changing their personality. That seems wrong. The problem reveals tension in our concept of personal identity over time. We want responsibility to track identity, but we cannot agree on what makes someone the same person at different times. Physical continuity, psychological continuity, and legal identity can come apart. When they do, responsibility becomes unclear. The demandingness. Objection. Morality requires you to help others when you can at reasonable cost. But people in wealthy countries can always help someone. Every dollar spent on entertainment could save a life. Every hour watching television could be spent volunteering. If you must always help when possible, then morality demands you spend your entire life helping others with no time for personal projects or pleasures. This seems too demanding. Morality should leave room for your own life. But where do you draw the line? How much helping is enough? Any line seems arbitrary. If you can save a life by giving up dinner at a restaurant, must you? If yes, then you must give up all luxuries. If no, then why is that life worth less than your meal? Some respond by denying the demandingness objection. Morality really is that demanding. Most people are living deeply immoral lives by failing to help as much as they can. This is uncomfortable but true. Others say morality includes agent-centered prerogatives. You are allowed to give some weight to your own interests. Not infinite weight, but enough to live your own life. But how much weight? What ratio of self-interest to altruism is permissible? Another approach is to distinguish between moral requirements and moral ideals. Morality requires you not harm others and help them in emergencies. Beyond that, helping is supererogatory, good but not required. Saints and heroes go beyond duty, but ordinary people need not reach that level. But this distinction seems arbitrary. If someone is dying and you can help, how is that different from an emergency? The demandingness objection reveals tension between morality's universal scope and human limitations. Morality seems to require more than people can give while remaining human. The argument from queerness. If moral facts exist, they are very strange. They would be facts about what should be done, not about what is the case. They would be intrinsically action-guiding, just knowing them would give you reason to act. They would not be physical, not be mental, but somehow exist independently. No other facts are like this. Scientific facts describe the world. Mathematical facts describe abstract relations. But moral facts would be prescriptive, normative, and motivating in ways nothing else is. Their metaphysical category is utterly unique and puzzling. This is the argument from queerness. It says moral realism requires believing in a type of entity so strange that we should reject it. Moral facts would be queer, not in any ordinary sense, but in the sense of being metaphysically weird. Defenders of moral realism respond that moral facts are no stranger than mathematical facts. Numbers do not exist physically, but we accept them. Moral facts can exist similarly as abstract truths we discover through reason. But mathematical facts do not tell us what to do. Moral facts supposedly provide reasons for action that mathematical facts lack. This makes them stranger, not similar. Others say all normative facts are queer, including epistemic facts about what you should believe. If we accept epistemic normativity, we should accept moral normativity. But skeptics can bite the bullet and reject all normative facts. Maybe there are no objective facts about what you should do or believe. Maybe normativity is subjective or conventional. The argument from queerness does not prove moral facts do not exist, but it places a burden on moral realists. They must explain how these strange facts fit into our understanding of reality. The non-identity problem. A woman takes medicine that affects fetal development. If she waits 2 months before conceiving, she will have a healthy child. If she conceives now, her child will have a disability. She conceives now. Did she harm her child? One answer is yes. She chose an action that resulted in her child having a disability. The child is worse off than if she had waited. But here is the problem. If she had waited, this child would not exist. A different child would have been born. The child with the disability cannot claim to be harmed. The alternative was not existing at all, which is not better for that child. So the woman did not harm her child. Yet the action seems wrong. She knowingly created a person with a preventable disability. This is the non-identity problem. Actions that create people seem wrong even though they harm no one. The people created would not exist otherwise, so they cannot be worse off. Some respond by rejecting person-affecting morality. Morality is not just about making existing people better off. It is about bringing about good states of affairs. Creating a disabled person, when you could create a healthy person, makes the world worse, even if it harms no one. Others say the woman wrongs her child even without harming them. Creating someone with a preventable disability fails to show proper respect, even if the alternative is non-existence. But how can you wrong someone without making them worse off? Wronging seems to require harming, and harm requires being worse off than some alternative. The non-identity problem matters for policy. Decisions about environmental protection affect future generations. But future people would not exist if we made different choices. Can we harm them by creating worse conditions if the alternative is them not existing? The paradox of desire. You desire something because you believe getting it will make you happy. But once you get it, the desire fades, and happiness does not increase as much as expected. So you form new desires. The cycle continues forever. Happiness depends on desire satisfaction, but satisfied desires stop making you happy. Lasting happiness seems impossible. This is the paradox of desire, and it suggests that pursuing satisfaction is self-defeating. The more you get what you want, the less you want it, and the less satisfaction you get. Some respond by saying we need the right desires. Instead of desiring external goods, desire internal states like peace or wisdom. These can be lasting once achieved. But even these desires follow the pattern. Once you achieve peace, you stop actively seeking it, and it becomes ordinary rather than satisfying. Others say happiness comes not from satisfied desire but from the process of pursuing goals. The journey matters more than the destination, but this means you should never fully achieve your goals. You should keep striving forever. That seems exhausting. Another view is that the paradox shows desire-satisfaction theories of happiness are wrong. Happiness is not about getting what you want. It is about psychological well-being, positive emotions, or living well regardless of desire. But desires still drive behavior. If satisfying them does not produce lasting happiness, what are we doing? The paradox reveals that our motivational system might be poorly designed for happiness. We are built to constantly want more, not to be satisfied with what we have. Evolution selected for striving, not contentment. The is-ought gap returns. You cannot derive ought from is. No amount of factual description generates moral conclusions. But all reasoning must start somewhere. Moral reasoning starts with moral premises. To justify those premises, you need more moral claims. Eventually, you reach moral claims you cannot justify with further moral reasoning. These foundational moral claims seem to come from nowhere. They are not derived from facts. They are not proven by logic. They are just asserted. Some say foundational moral claims are self-evident. We grasp them through moral intuition, similar to how we grasp logical truths through rational intuition. But people's moral intuitions conflict. What seems self-evident to one person is rejected by another. Self-evidence cannot settle moral disagreement. Others say we derive ought from is by including human nature in the facts. Humans naturally seek flourishing. Ought claims about what promotes flourishing follow from facts about human nature, but this assumes we ought to promote flourishing. That assumption is itself an ought claim that cannot be derived from facts about what humans happen to seek. Another approach is to give up on objective morality. Moral claims are not true or false. They are expressions of emotion or social convention. The is-ought gap shows that morality does not describe reality, but giving up objectivity has costs. It makes moral progress mysterious. It makes moral disagreement irresolvable. It undermines moral criticism across cultures. The is-ought gap reveals a fundamental puzzle about moral knowledge. Moral truths, if they exist, are not empirical facts. But if they are not empirical, what are they? How do we know them? The gap between factual and moral claims remains unbridged. The paradox of self-deception. Self-deception requires both believing and not believing something at the same time. To deceive yourself, you must know the truth, but convince yourself of something false. But if you know you are trying to deceive yourself, the deception should fail. You cannot forget something while actively trying to forget it, yet self-deception clearly occurs. People believe things they know are false. They avoid evidence that threatens their beliefs. They rationalize and make excuses. Somehow the mind maintains contradictory states simultaneously. Some explain self-deception through mental compartments. One part of your mind knows the truth. Another part believes the falsehood. They do not communicate. But this seems to make the mind too divided. You are supposedly one person with one consciousness. How can you both know and not know the same thing? Others say self-deception is not literally believing contradictions. It is selective attention and biased reasoning. You focus on evidence supporting what you want to believe and ignore contrary evidence. You do not actually hold contradictory beliefs. But this milder version does not capture all cases. Sometimes people seem genuinely convinced of things they should know are false. They are not just ignoring evidence but actively believing the opposite. Another explanation is that self-deception is motivated ignorance. You avoid learning the truth. You do not deceive yourself about what you already know. You simply refuse to find out. But this only works for things you have not already learned. Once you know something, you cannot unknow it through self-deception. The paradox of self-deception reveals something strange about consciousness. The mind can hide things from itself, believe while disbelieving, know while not knowing. The unity of consciousness is less complete than it seems. The problem of dirty hands. A leader faces a choice. Torturing a suspect will extract information that prevents a terrorist attack. Refusing to torture preserves moral principles but allows innocent people to die. Either choice seems wrong. Torturing violates fundamental rights. Letting people die violates the duty to protect them. This is the problem of dirty hands. Some roles require doing wrong to prevent worse outcomes. Leaders cannot keep their hands clean and still do their job, but this seems to undermine morality. If the job requires acting immorally, maybe the job itself is immoral. Or maybe we need a different framework where consequences matter more than rules. Some respond that the lesser evil is not actually wrong. When forced to choose between harms, choosing the smaller harm is the right thing to do. The leader who tortures to save lives acts rightly. But this seems too easy. It allows terrible actions as long as they prevent something worse. It removes the tragedy from tragic choices. Others say both options are genuinely wrong. The leader must choose between wrongs, and whichever they choose, they do something immoral. Morality does not always offer a right answer. Sometimes you must do wrong and accept the guilt. But if you must do wrong, how are you responsible? Responsibility seems to require the possibility of doing right. If every option is wrong, then you cannot be blamed. Another view is that leaders occupy special moral space. Ordinary morality applies to individuals. Political morality allows actions that personal morality forbids. Leaders play by different rules. But this seems to give leaders too much license. It risks justifying any atrocity in the name of necessity. The Sorites paradox returns. 1 grain of sand is not a heap. 2 grains are not a heap. At no point does adding 1 grain turn a non-heap into a heap. Yet clearly large piles are heaps. This is the Sorites paradox, and it applies to more than sand. It applies to every vague concept. When does day become night? When does walking become running? When does a person become old? We use these categories constantly, but they have no sharp boundaries. Some say vague terms have borderline cases where there is no fact of the matter. The statement, "this is a heap," can be neither true nor false, but classical logic requires every statement to be true or false. Allowing a third value requires revising logic itself. Others say, vague terms have precise boundaries we cannot know. There is a fact about exactly when a heap begins, but we cannot access that fact. Language is precise, even if our knowledge is not. But this seems absurd. How could there be a fact about the exact grain that makes a heap unknowable even in principle? Another response is that context determines boundaries. What counts as a heap depends on what you are using the term for. There are no absolute boundaries, only contextual ones. But contexts themselves are vague. When does one context end and another begin? Still others embrace vagueness as fundamental to reality, not just language. The world itself contains borderline cases without determinate status. But most believe reality is precise, and only our descriptions are vague. The Sorites paradox remains unsolved. Every response has costs. We must either revise logic, accept unknowable facts, make everything contextual, or say reality itself is vague. None of these options is fully satisfying. The leveling down objection. Equality matters. A more equal society is better than a less equal one. But suppose you could make a society more equal by making everyone worse off. Destroy the advantage of the better off without helping the worse off. This increases equality but helps no one. Is it an improvement? Most people say no. Equality that makes everyone worse off is not valuable. This is the leveling down objection. It challenges the idea that equality matters intrinsically. If equality were valuable in itself, leveling down would be good. Since leveling down is not good, equality must not be valuable in itself. Perhaps equality matters only instrumentally. It prevents envy, promotes cooperation, or reflects equal respect. But these instrumental values do not require exact equality. Small inequalities would be fine as long as they did not cause problems. Defenders of equality respond that leveling down is not really good, but it is one good-making feature among others. A society with more equality has something going for it, even if other factors outweigh that benefit. Equality contributes positive value that must be weighed against other considerations. But this seems weak. If you would never actually choose the more equal option because it makes everyone worse off, in what sense does it have positive value? Another response is that equality matters relationally. It is about people being equal to each other, not about the distribution being equal. Leveling down changes distribution but does not improve relations. But this move shifts the question. What matters about people being equal to each other? If not the distribution, then what? The leveling down objection reveals that our egalitarian intuitions are complex. We value equality, but not for its own sake. We value it as part of a larger package that includes well-being and respect. The value of existence. Is existence good? Being alive seems better than not existing. But this is hard to make sense of. To be better off, you must be worse off in some comparison state. But non-existence is not a state you can be in. There is no you to be worse off. Comparisons between existence and non-existence seem incoherent. Yet we act as if existence has value. We avoid death. We create new lives. We say we are glad to be alive. If existence has no value because the comparison is incoherent, these attitudes are confused. Some respond that existence is not good, but ending existence is bad. Death harms you by depriving you of future experiences. The harm is the loss, not the state of being dead. But this still requires comparing what you get while alive to what you would get if dead. The comparison problem remains. Others say existence is good for creatures that exist. From the inside, life has value. This does not require comparing existence to non-existence. It just requires that conscious beings prefer to continue existing. But preferences are not the same as values. You can prefer something without it being good. Another approach is to give up on objective value entirely. Nothing is objectively good or bad, including existence. Value is relative to beings with preferences. Beings prefer to exist, so existence is valuable to them. But this makes value subjective in a way that seems to empty it of significance. The question of existence's value matters for decisions about creating life. Should we have children? Should we extend life through medicine? If existence has no value, these questions lose urgency. But most people feel existence does matter, even if they cannot quite explain why. The doctrine of double effect redux. An action has two effects, one intended and good, one foreseen and bad. The doctrine of double effect says the action is permissible if you intend the good effect and merely foresee the bad effect. But critics argue the intention distinction does not matter morally. You knowingly cause both effects. What you call intended versus foreseen is just a matter of your mental state. Mental states should not determine moral status. What matters is what you actually do. Others defend the distinction. Intending harm treats a person as a means. Foreseeing harm treats their suffering as an unfortunate side effect. The first fails to respect their dignity. The second is compatible with respecting them while pursuing other goals. But this defense struggles with cases where the foreseen harm is certain and avoidable. If you bomb a military target knowing it will kill nearby civilians, does it really matter whether you intend their deaths or merely foresee them? They are just as dead either way. Another problem is that intentions are flexible. You can describe your action to make almost any effect intended or merely foreseen. If you want the doctrine to allow your action, you describe it one way. If you want to forbid it, you describe it another way. The doctrine might capture a real moral distinction. Or it might be a tool for rationalizing what we want to allow. The difference between intending and foreseeing seems important from inside deliberation. But from outside, looking at consequences, the distinction disappears. The doctrine remains controversial, precisely because it privileges internal mental states over external results. The knowledge argument redux. A scientist knows all physical facts about color vision, but has never seen color. When she finally sees red, does she learn something new? If yes, then there are non-physical facts about experience. Knowing the physical story leaves something out. If no, then her new experience does not teach her anything, which seems false. Critics of the argument say she gains a new ability, not new knowledge. She learns how to imagine, recognize, and remember red. But these are practical skills, not facts. She knew all the facts before. But the distinction between knowing facts and gaining abilities is not always clear. Knowing what something is like seems like factual knowledge, not just practical skill. Others say she learns old facts in a new way. She knew about red through description. Now she knows through direct acquaintance. Same facts, different modes of presentation. But this response suggests that modes of presentation matter for knowledge. Not all ways of knowing are equivalent. Experiencing something adds information beyond propositional knowledge. Still, others deny the setup. If she truly knew all physical facts, she would know what seeing red is like. Our inability to derive experience from physical description reflects our cognitive limitations, not a gap in physical explanation. The knowledge argument remains contested. It turns on whether subjective experience contains information that cannot be captured in objective physical descriptions. The question matters for consciousness, artificial intelligence, and the relationship between mind and body. The problem of other minds. Right now, you are experiencing consciousness. You have thoughts, feelings, sensations. You know this absolutely, because you are living it from the inside. But here is something strange. You cannot know for certain that anyone else is conscious. Look at the people around you. They walk, talk, smile, frown. They say things like, "I am happy," or "that hurts." But you never actually experience their consciousness. You only see their behavior. You observe bodies moving and sounds coming from mouths. You witness actions that seem to indicate inner experience, but you never step inside someone else's mind to verify it is really there. For all you know, every other person could be a sophisticated biological robot with no inner experience at all. They could be what philosophers call zombies, beings that act exactly like conscious creatures but have no actual feelings or thoughts inside. They would look the same, sound the same, behave identically, but the lights would not be on inside. Pure darkness, pure emptiness. You cannot prove this is wrong. No test exists that can confirm consciousness in another being. You cannot open up a brain and point to the consciousness. You cannot measure it with instruments. You cannot make someone prove they have inner experience, because any proof they offer would just be more behavior you are observing from the outside. We all assume other people are conscious because it seems natural. We reason by analogy. My body and brain are similar to other human bodies and brains. My body and brain produce consciousness. Therefore, their bodies and brains probably produce consciousness too. But this is just an assumption, not proof. This problem gets worse with animals. Most people assume a dog is conscious, but what about an ant? What about a plant that reacts to light? What about a very sophisticated computer program that claims to have feelings? Where do you draw the line, and how do you justify that line? The problem of other minds reveals a deep isolation at the heart of existence. You are trapped in your own consciousness with no way to truly reach another one. The paradox of tolerance redux. Should a tolerant society tolerate intolerance? If yes, then intolerant movements can gain power and destroy tolerance. If no, then the society is not truly tolerant. One response is that tolerance has built-in limits. You tolerate everything except intolerance itself. This prevents intolerant movements while preserving general tolerance. But how do you identify intolerance? Any restriction can be called intolerant. Any belief system can claim it is being persecuted. The limit is only useful if you can distinguish genuine threats to tolerance from legitimate disagreement. Another response is that tolerance is a political principle, not a personal virtue. The state should allow different views, but private individuals and institutions can exclude intolerant views. This preserves tolerance at the political level, while allowing social pressure against intolerance. But where is the line between state and society? Social pressure can be coercive. Exclusion from platforms and institutions can silence views as effectively as legal bans. Others say we should tolerate intolerant speech but not intolerant action. People can believe and say what they want. But once they act to restrict others' freedom, society can respond. But speech and action are not always separate. Speech can be action when it incites violence or creates hostile environments. The paradox reveals deep questions about the nature of tolerance. Is it a principle that applies universally, or a strategic commitment that applies only to those who reciprocate? Is tolerance about allowing everything, or about maintaining conditions where diverse views can coexist? The answer determines how we respond to extremism and hate. The problem of future generations. We make decisions that affect people who do not yet exist. Climate policy, nuclear waste storage, and resource use will impact lives centuries from now. Do we owe obligations to future people? Some say yes. Future people will exist and will be affected by what we do. Their interests matter just as much as current people's interests. We should leave them a livable world. But future people do not exist yet. How can you owe obligations to beings that might never exist? Obligations require beneficiaries. Non-existent people cannot be beneficiaries. Others say we owe obligations not to specific future people but to the general project of continuing humanity. We should preserve conditions that allow future flourishing, whoever the future people turn out to be. But this shifts the question. Why does continuing humanity matter? If future people do not exist to be harmed by extinction, what makes extinction bad? Another problem is that our actions determine who exists in the future. Different policies lead to different people being born. We cannot make future people better off because changing our actions changes which people exist. This is the non-identity problem applied to future generations. Some respond that we should focus on creating good lives rather than benefiting particular people. We should act so that whoever exists will have good lives, even if we cannot benefit any specific person. But this faces the repugnant conclusion. It seems to imply we should create enormous populations with barely worth living lives. The problem of future generations reveals that our moral frameworks were built for dealing with existing people. Extending them to potential people creates puzzles we have not resolved. The zygote argument. A fertilized egg is not a person, an adult is a person. At what point in between does personhood begin? There seems to be no non-arbitrary answer. One cell is not a person, two cells are not a person. Neither is 3 or 4. But at some number of cells, personhood emerges. Where? Some propose heartbeat, brain activity, viability, or birth. But each line seems arbitrary. Why is brain activity more significant than any other milestone? Why does passing through a birth canal matter morally? One response is to accept that personhood is gradual. Early embryos have little moral status. Late fetuses have more. Newborns have even more. Moral status increases continuously without sharp thresholds. But law and ethics need clear lines. You cannot say abortion is somewhat wrong depending on exactly how developed the fetus is. Rules require precision. Another response is to say personhood requires certain capacities like rationality or self-awareness. But newborns lack these capacities. This view seems to imply infanticide is permissible, which almost everyone rejects. Others bite the bullet. Early abortion and infanticide are both permissible because neither involves killing a person. Our emotional reactions to infants are evolutionary but not morally significant. This view is consistent but extremely counterintuitive. Still, others reject the whole framework. Instead of asking when personhood begins, ask what reasons exist for or against abortion at different stages. Different considerations apply at different times without needing a single threshold. The zygote argument reveals that biological continuity does not map neatly onto moral categories. Development is gradual. Our concepts are discrete. The mismatch creates unresolvable puzzles about moral status. The paradox of friendship. Friendship involves caring about someone for their own sake, not for what they do for you. But you benefit from friendship. Friends provide support, companionship, and joy. So it seems you care about friends partly for what they do for you, not entirely for their sake. This creates tension. If you care about someone only for themselves, the benefits seem accidental. If you care about them partly for the benefits, the friendship seems self-interested and not really friendship. Some say genuine friendship balances both elements. You care about the friend for themselves and also enjoy benefits. The two motives coexist without contradiction. But how do you tell if you truly care about someone for themselves? If friendship ended when benefits ended, that suggests the benefits were the real motivation. Yet questioning your own motives risks destroying the friendship. Self-conscious examination of whether you care properly makes caring impossible. Others say the paradox confuses levels. On one level, you care about your friend non-instrumentally. On another level, having such relationships benefits you. The benefit is not your reason for caring, but caring still benefits you. But this seems like having it both ways. If the relationship did not benefit you, would you still maintain it? If not, then benefit matters. Another view is that the purest friendships transcend self-interest entirely. You would sacrifice for your friend, even with no benefit to yourself. But most friendships are not so pure. Most involve mutual benefit and mutual care mixed together inseparably. The paradox reveals that our motivations are rarely simple. We care for multiple reasons simultaneously, and sorting them into pure categories is artificial. The is-ought problem. One more time. Every moral argument eventually hits bedrock. You reach a moral claim that cannot be justified by further moral reasoning or derived from non-moral facts. This foundational claim seems arbitrary. Why accept it rather than some other starting point? Some say moral foundations are self-evident. We grasp them through intuition, the same way we grasp logical principles. But people disagree about what is self-evident. Appeals to moral intuition do not resolve disputes. Others ground morality in human nature or reason. But moving from descriptions of human nature to prescriptions about how we should act still requires a moral bridge. That humans seek flourishing does not prove they should, unless you add the moral principle that we should pursue what we seek. Another approach is to accept that moral foundations are chosen rather than discovered. We decide what values to accept and build from there. Morality is constructed, not found, but this seems to make morality arbitrary. If foundations are chosen, why not choose differently? How do you criticize someone who chooses cruelty as their foundation? Still, another view is that moral claims are not propositions that can be true or false. They are expressions of emotion, commands, or commitments. The is-ought gap shows that morality is not about truth at all, but giving up on moral truth seems to eliminate moral knowledge. It makes moral progress mysterious and moral disagreement irresolvable. The is-ought problem remains philosophy's most persistent challenge. We cannot fully justify starting points. We cannot derive values from facts. Yet we reason morally every day. The foundations of ethics remain uncertain even as we build elaborate systems on top of them. The epistemic closure problem. If you know one thing and know it implies another thing, do you automatically know the second thing? This principle seems obvious. Knowledge should be closed under known logical implication. But closure creates problems. You know you have hands. You know that if you have hands, you are not a brain in a vat being fed false sensory data. Therefore, by closure, you know you are not a brain in a vat, but you do not know you are not a brain in a vat. You have no evidence that rules it out. So, either you do not know you have hands, or closure is false, or you do somehow know you are not a brain in a vat without evidence. Some deny closure. You can know one thing without knowing its implications, even when you know the implications follow. This solves the puzzle but makes knowledge strange. You can know less than what you know follows from what you know. Others bite the bullet on skepticism. You do not actually know you have hands because you cannot rule out being a brain in a vat. Ordinary knowledge claims are false, but this is hard to accept. It seems obvious that you know you have hands. Still others say you do know you are not a brain in a vat, not through evidence, but through a kind of default entitlement. The brain in vat scenario is too far-fetched to take seriously. Knowledge does not require ruling out every logical possibility, but this makes knowledge standards contextual and flexible. What counts as far-fetched depends on your situation. The closure problem reveals tension between our principles about knowledge and our confidence in ordinary beliefs. We cannot have both without giving something up. The problem of moral motivation. Moral beliefs seem connected to motivation. If you truly believe something is wrong, you are motivated not to do it. But beliefs are one thing and desires are another. Beliefs represent how the world is. Desires represent how you want it to be. How can a belief automatically generate desire? Some say moral beliefs are special. They are intrinsically motivating. Recognizing that something is right gives you reason to do it automatically. But this makes moral beliefs very different from other beliefs. Believing the sky is blue does not motivate anything. Why would moral beliefs be different? Others say moral beliefs are not really beliefs at all. They are disguised desires or emotions. When you say something is wrong, you are expressing disapproval, not stating a fact. This explains motivation easily, but gives up on moral truth. If moral claims are not beliefs, they cannot be true or false. Another view is that moral beliefs combine with standing desires to produce motivation. You believe helping is right. You desire to do what is right. Together, these produce motivation to help. But this requires a desire to do what is right, which seems like a moral commitment that itself needs explanation. Why should you desire to do what is right? Still, another approach is to deny that moral beliefs must motivate. You can believe something is wrong and not be motivated to avoid it. Weakness of will is possible. But if moral beliefs do not reliably motivate, what makes them moral rather than just factual? The problem of moral motivation reveals uncertainty about what moral beliefs are and how they relate to action. Every answer has costs. The fading qualia problem. A brain is gradually replaced with silicon chips that perform the same functions. After each replacement, behavior remains identical. Eventually, the entire brain is silicon. Does consciousness persist throughout? If you say yes, then consciousness depends only on function, not on physical substrate. Silicon can be conscious just like neurons can, but this seems strange. How can replacing organic matter with silicon preserve subjective experience? If you say no, then at some replacement consciousness fades. But when? Each chip preserves function exactly. If one replacement preserves consciousness, why does the next one eliminate it? Some say consciousness fades gradually. As more neurons are replaced, experience becomes dimmer until nothing remains. But the being still claims to be conscious throughout. It reports experiences normally. From the outside, nothing changes. Others say consciousness disappears suddenly at some threshold. Below the threshold, the system is conscious. Above it, the system is a zombie that acts conscious but has no inner experience. But this seems arbitrary. Why would one chip cross the threshold when it is functionally identical to the ones before? Another response is to accept that silicon can be conscious if organized correctly. Substrate does not matter. Only functional organization matters. But this challenges our intuitions about consciousness, requiring biological processes. The fading qualia problem suggests that either consciousness is multiply realizable across different substrates, or functional equivalence is not enough for consciousness, or consciousness can fade while function remains constant. All options are puzzling. The problem of clashing rights. One person has a right to free speech. Another has a right not to be harmed. The first person wants to say things that cause emotional distress to the second. Whose right wins? Some say free speech is more fundamental. Restricting speech is a slippery slope to tyranny. Emotional harm, while unfortunate, is not sufficient reason to limit expression. But this seems to ignore genuine suffering. Speech can traumatize, threaten, and exclude. Why should expression automatically outweigh harm? Others say freedom ends where harm begins. If speech causes significant harm, it can be restricted. But what counts as significant harm? Offense is not harm. Discomfort is not harm. Where do you draw the line between legitimate expression and harmful speech? Another approach is to weigh rights contextually. Sometimes speech wins. Sometimes harm prevention wins. It depends on the specific case and competing interests. But this makes rights uncertain. If they can be outweighed, are they really rights? Or are they just interests that must be balanced? Still, another view is that rights create zones of protected action. Within your zone, others cannot interfere. But zones can overlap. When they do, we need principles to resolve conflicts. But what are those principles? Where do they come from? The problem of clashing rights reveals that rights are not absolute. But once you admit they can be limited, determining the limits becomes very difficult. Every limitation creates exceptions that must be justified. Every exception creates pressure for more exceptions. The framework of rights becomes complicated and contested. The paradox of self-amendment. A constitution contains rules for how to amend itself. Can those rules be used to change themselves? If yes, then the constitution is not truly fixed. You could amend the amendment rules to make further changes easier, gradually dismantling all protections. If no, then there is something outside the constitution that constrains it, some meta-rule that governs amendment. But where does that meta-rule come from? Some say amendment rules can change themselves but should not. There are procedural limits and moral limits. Procedural limits can be changed through procedure. Moral limits cannot be changed at all. But this just pushes the question to which limits are which. Who decides what is merely procedural versus fundamentally moral? Others say constitutions are not self-validating. They rest on social agreement. As long as people accept changes, changes are valid. But this makes constitutional law unstable. It depends on ongoing consent that can shift. Another view is that some rules are truly foundational and cannot be changed through normal procedures. They can only be changed through revolution, replacing the entire system. But identifying which rules are foundational is itself contested. Different people disagree about what is truly essential. The paradox of self-amendment reveals tension between stability and flexibility. We want rules that persist over time. We also want the ability to improve and adapt rules. Creating rules that are both stable and changeable requires solving a puzzle about their own authority that has no clean solution. The problem of evil demons. An evil demon could be controlling your thoughts right now. Everything you believe about logic and rationality could be wrong because the demon makes you think they are right. You try to use reason to rule out the demon, but the demon controls your reasoning. Any argument you construct is shaped by the demon, so you cannot trust arguments against the demon. Some say this skeptical scenario is too extreme to take seriously. We must assume basic reasoning is reliable or we cannot function. But this response does not answer the demon argument. It just says we must ignore it for practical reasons. Others say we have a kind of default entitlement to trust our faculties. In the absence of specific evidence that they are unreliable, we are justified in using them. But the demon scenario provides a possible explanation for why they might be unreliable. Does possibility of error defeat default justification? Another approach is to say that justification is internal. As long as your beliefs cohere and follow from each other properly, they are justified, even if an external demon makes them all false. But this seems to disconnect justification from truth in a troubling way. Still, another response is to change the question. Instead of asking whether beliefs are absolutely justified, ask whether they are justified relative to your evidence and cognitive situation. Given your position, your beliefs are reasonable, even if they could be wrong for reasons you cannot access. The demon problem reveals that absolute certainty is impossible. We must reason from within our own perspective, using tools we cannot fully validate. This circularity is inescapable, but it might not be a problem. Reasoning must start somewhere, and starting with the faculties we have is the only option available. The transplant problem. 5 people need organ transplants. 1 needs a heart, 1 needs a liver, 1 needs a kidney, and 2 need other organs. Without transplants, all 5 will die. A healthy person walks into the hospital for a routine checkup. You could kill this person and distribute their organs to the 5 patients, saving 5 lives at the cost of 1. Should you do it? Most people say no. Killing someone to harvest their organs is murder, even if it would save more lives. But this conflicts with the trolley problem, where most people say you should divert the trolley to kill 1 rather than 5. Both cases involve killing 1 to save 5. Why does the method matter? Some say the difference is that the transplant case uses the person as a means. You kill them as a way to get their organs. In the trolley case, you redirect a threat. The person dies but is not used as a tool. But this distinction is subtle. In both cases, you knowingly cause 1 death to prevent 5 deaths. Whether you call it using them as a means seems like a description choice. Others point to consent. The person on the sidetrack is already in danger, like the 5. They are all potential victims of the trolley. The patient is not involved in the situation at all until you drag them in. But the person on the sidetrack did not consent to be there or to risk death to save others. Another response is that killing through action feels different than killing through inaction or redirection. Direct killing is worse than allowing death or redirecting existing threats, But this suggests deontological rules matter more than consequences. The transplant problem reveals that our moral intuitions are not unified by a single principle. Different cases trigger different rules, and we have no master theory that explains all our judgments. The experience requirement. Can you know what something is like without experiencing it? You can learn all the facts about color vision without seeing colors. But when you finally see red, you learn something new. This suggests that some knowledge requires direct experience. You cannot know what things are like just by learning facts about them, but this creates a puzzle. What is this extra knowledge? If it is factual, then it should be learnable from descriptions. If it is not factual, then it is not really knowledge. Some say experiential knowledge is a different kind of knowledge, knowing how rather than knowing that. You learn how to recognize, imagine, and remember red. This is practical skill, not factual information. But the distinction between knowing how and knowing that is not always clear. Knowing what red looks like seems like factual knowledge about red's appearance. Others say you learn old facts in a new way. You knew about red through description. Now you know through acquaintance. Same facts, different modes of access. But if the facts are the same, why does the new mode feel like learning something new? Another view is that experience provides a kind of information that descriptions cannot capture. Subjective, what it is like information is distinct from objective physical information. This supports the idea that consciousness cannot be reduced to physical facts. The experience requirement reveals a gap between third-person knowledge and first-person knowledge. You can know everything about a mind from the outside and still not know what it is like to be that mind. This gap might reflect limits on what language can express, or might point to non-physical aspects of consciousness. The Sleeping Beauty problem Redux. You are put to sleep. A coin is flipped. Heads means you wake once. Tails means you wake twice with memory erased between. You wake up not knowing which waking this is. What should your credence be that the coin landed heads? The halfer says 1/2. The coin is fair and waking up does not change that. The thirder says 1/3. There are 3 possible waking experiences, and 2 involve tails. But there is another puzzle. Before the experiment, you should think heads and tails are equally likely. During the experiment, if you are a thirder, you think tails is more likely. After the experiment ends, you should again think they were equally likely. Your credence about the same event changes just because you are told the experiment is over, even though this gives you no new information about the coin. This seems wrong. How can finding out the experiment ended change your belief about what happened? Some say credence should be relativized to time and knowledge state. Before the experiment, tails is 50%. During wakings, tails is 67%. After the experiment, tails is back to 50%. All 3 are correct, relative to different situations. Others say this shows the thirder answer is wrong. If it leads to credences that shift based on uninformative updates, something is mistaken in the reasoning. Still others say the puzzle reveals that credence is ambiguous. There is betting credence and epistemic credence. They can come apart in cases with memory loss and duplication. The Sleeping Beauty problem remains controversial precisely because it sits at the intersection of probability, identity, and indexical information. Getting the right answer requires solving multiple puzzles at once. The value incommensurability problem. How many mosquito bites equal the disvalue of 1 human death? There seems to be no answer. Human life has infinite value compared to mosquito bites. No number of bites adds up to a death. But this creates problems. If human life has infinite value, you should sacrifice anything to save 1 life. You should spend all resources on making tiny improvements to safety, leaving nothing for other values. Yet this seems wrong. We trade safety for other goods all the time. Some say values are incommensurable. They cannot be compared on a single scale. Human life and minor discomfort are different kinds of values that do not add up. But if values cannot be compared, how do we make decisions? Every choice requires comparing options. If comparison is impossible, choice becomes arbitrary. Others say everything has a finite value that can be compared, even if the numbers are very lopsided. 1 million mosquito bites might equal 1 death. This allows comparison and rational choice, but it creates repugnant conclusions. It suggests you should allow someone to die, rather than let a million people experience mild discomfort. Another approach is to say values can be roughly compared, even if not precisely measured. Human life is much more important than mosquito bites, and that rough comparison is enough for practical decisions. But rough comparison does not help with hard cases where values are close. When values are nearly balanced, we need precision. The incommensurability problem suggests that rational choice might be impossible when values cannot be measured on a common scale. We must either reduce all values to a single metric or accept that some choices have no rationally correct answer. The question of why anything exists. The universe exists. Why? Every explanation appeals to something else that exists. The universe exists because of the Big Bang. The Big Bang happened because of quantum fluctuations. Fluctuations occur because of quantum fields. But why do quantum fields exist? At some point, explanation must stop. Either something exists without explanation, or explanation continues forever, or it loops back on itself. All three options are deeply puzzling. If something exists without explanation, that seems arbitrary. Why does this thing exist, rather than nothing at all? If explanation continues forever, we never reach a final answer. Every explanation just raises a new question. If explanation loops, with later things explaining earlier things and vice versa, that seems circular and explains nothing. Some say a necessary being exists. This being must exist by its nature and explains everything else. But why must this being exist? What makes its existence necessary rather than contingent? The appeal to necessity seems to just label the mystery rather than solve it. Others say the universe itself is the unexplained foundation. It is a brute fact with no further explanation. We must accept that existence has no ultimate reason. But this feels unsatisfying. The deepest question seems to have no answer. Another view is that nothingness is unstable. The default state is not nothing but something. Existence requires no explanation because non-existence is impossible, but this reverses the puzzle without solving it. Why is nothingness impossible? The question of why anything exists might have no answer. Perhaps existence is the ultimate brute fact that grounds everything else but has no ground itself. Or perhaps our minds are not equipped to grasp the answer. The question might require thinking outside categories of existence and causation that shape all our thought. Either way, we face mystery at the foundation of everything.